Chapter 160. The Flying Goose Terrace was quiet for a while, with a few mountain breezes blowing. Because Lu Chen did not speak, Su Qingjun also quietened down. She looked at him calmly, as if waiting for his answer with unusual patience. After a while, Lu Chen said, "Can I not answer this question?" Su Qingjun thought about it and said, "You just helped me so much, I definitely can't force you. It's fine if you don't want to say it, but I really want to know." Lu Chen smiled, then turned and walked away, saying, "Thank you for your understanding." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, then shouted at his back, "You really don't want to say?" Lu Chen smiled and waved at her. Then he walked into his thatched hut. Su Qingjun was momentarily angry. In the past, any young man in front of her would mostly be in fear and trepidation. Answering every question she asked was also the right thing to do. She did not expect to meet with a soft rebuff today. She glared at the straw hut, clenched her teeth, and angrily wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, then turned and strode away. However, after walking for a while, she suddenly stopped again, her brows slightly furrowed, as if she had forgotten something. After a while, she turned back, walked to the door of the straw hut, and knocked on the door. "Please come in." Lu Chen's voice came from inside. Su Qingjun opened the door and saw Lu Chen sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at her and saying, "What's wrong?" "And there's something." Su Qingjun said, "The matter you mentioned to me before, I thought about it a few times, and I think, still." For some reason, she seemed to be at a loss at the end, and her words were not very clear. Lu Chen looked strangely at Su Qingjun, asking, "What is it?" Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. It seemed that she had finally made up her mind. She said, "During this period of time, you will help me stop the other members of the Su family." Lu Chen was slightly surprised. "You've actually thought it through?" Su Qingjun smiled bitterly. She said softly, "First, I'm injured now. It's not good for me to meet people like this, and it's not good for others to know the truth. I need you to help me. Second, after last night, I'm actually a little cold-hearted. I also feel that it's not good to take care of you like this." Lu Chen frowned and said, "I haven't asked you, but what happened last night?" Su Qingjun said indifferently, "It's not a big deal. Sumo's group of 3 are used to being insolent in Kunwa City. They provoked someone and got into a conflict. After a big fight, they asked someone else to fight again. They said that person was only a very strong cultivator at the peak of the foundation building realm. Who would have thought that in the end, another person with strange Taoist techniques, Jin Dan Friar, would appear?" Lu Chen was silent. After a moment, he nodded and said, "No wonder." Su Qingjun also seemed unwilling to talk about this topic. She looked up at Lu Chen and said, "Can you help me with this matter?" Lu Chen smiled. He met her gaze and said, "You're only asking me to help you stop people because it's not good for you to meet people. I don't want to do this." Su Qingjun frowned and said, "Why?" "If I help you with this matter, I'll offend many people in the Su family. Have you thought about it?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "I'm neither your relative nor friend, and I have no enmity with the other people in the Su family. Why should I provoke this kind of trouble?" Su Qingjun was startled. She seemed to be surprised by Lu Chen's sudden coldness and outspokenness. She said, "Didn't you?" Lu Chen gently waved his hand and said, "In fact, you still feel from the bottom of your heart that it's only right and proper for others to help you, don't you?" Su Qingjun was silent for a long time. Then she lightly pursed her lips and said, "I was wrong." Her complexion was a bit pale because of her injuries, but it also added a bit of a graceful beauty that made people feel sorry for her. However, Lu Chen seemed to turn a blind eye to this. He just calmly looked at her without saying a word. Su Qingjun raised her head and looked at him. She said, "I've thought about it. It's not good for me to show my current appearance to others. I do need your help this time. Are you willing to help me? If you need me to give you some compensation, we can discuss it." At this point, she seemed to be a little embarrassed and said with a hint of self-mockery, "Anyway, I just owed you a huge favor. I'll owe you a little more in the future. I'll just treat it as if I'll repay you slowly in the future." Lu Chen looked at her slightly pale but still beautiful face. After a while, he suddenly sighed and said, Since it's come to this, I'll help you to the end. Su Qingyan immediately smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you. You're really a good person." "A good person?" Lu Chen murmured and shook his head. He then looked at Su Qingjun and said seriously, "I can help you with this matter, but I can't do it alone. In order to stop someone, I will definitely offend someone. So, you must support me." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Okay." Lu Chen had no intention of brushing it off. Instead, he stared into her eyes and said, "I'll make it clear. I want you to support me. You can ignore ordinary insults, but if someone attacks me, you'll hit him where he hits me. You'll have to return double the amount of damage." Su Qingjun suddenly became silent. After a while, she smiled bitterly and said, "I really want to agree, but I'm really worried that when the time comes, I won't be able to do it." Lu Chen nodded and looked at the woman with a gentler gaze. He said, "It's rare that you're willing to tell me the truth." After a pause, he said, "Or do you feel embarrassed?" Su Qingjun said with some distress, "I also know that the people in my family are not all good people. There are also many bad things. But we all grew up in a family, and there are so many relatives connected by blood. I grew up among these people. It's really, even if they always take advantage of you and make you work hard for them, even if you get injured and vomit blood, none of them come to see you. Can't you feel embarrassed like this?" Su Qingjun looked like she was struggling. In the end, she smiled bitterly and said, "My master also reprimanded me for this matter several times. He also scolded me that if I don't change my mind, it will be difficult for me to become a great person in the future." Lu Chen was startled and said with some surprise, "That old man Mu Yuan actually said that to you?" Su Qingjun sighed and said, "Master loves me so much that he hates me for not becoming steel. Of course, these words can't be taken seriously. Hey, don't talk nonsense. How dare you call my master an old man?" She lowered her voice and said, "My master is good to me, but his temper is not so good to others. Be careful not to be caught by him, then you will be in trouble." Lu Chen looked at her and suddenly laughed. He nodded and said, "All right, because of what you said, I will teach you a way." Su Qingjun was a little surprised. Lu Chen said seriously, "Don't you think your attitude is wrong? It seems a little, but this is the devil in the heart." Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Su Qingjun's words. Su Qingjun was startled and said, "What? Devil in the heart?" "Yes, devil in the heart." Lu Chen said seriously, "Hey, don't look at me with that kind of expression, okay? I know the term devil in the heart. It sounds really stupid, always giving people the feeling that you are a swindler. How can you be worthy of a prestigious sect like ours? But think about it, everything about you is good. In the eyes of outsiders, you are almost a perfect girl. But when it comes to the people from the Su family, you become like this. There is something wrong, right?" Su Qingjun nodded slowly and said, "Yes." Lu Chen said again, "Actually, I see that you are so smart, you might have thought about these things in your heart. You just can't think of a way to get rid of these burdens in your heart, right?" "Burdens in the heart? Devil in the heart?" Su Qingjun murmured a few words. Her eyes brightened a little and looked at Lu Chen and said, "Really have a way?" "Yes, of course, whether it works or not depends on the person." "What way? Let me hear it." "Flip the table." "Flip the table?" "Yes, flip the table." At this moment, Su Qingjun only felt that her mind was in a mess. She always felt that everything the man in front of her said was too unreliable. But somewhere in her heart, there seemed to be a strange expectation. Maybe it works? Maybe it really works? But what is the way to flip the table? Su Qingjun asked in distress, looking at Lu Chen with a face of disbelief. "Look, I have a table here." Lu Chen pointed to the only wooden table in the thatched hut. "Oh, you hold it," Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun looked at him strangely. She wondered if she had been beaten silly. But after hesitating for a while, she still slowly walked over and held the table with her hand. "How does it feel?" Lu Chen asked. "This is made of wood," Su Qingjun said. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "Nonsense. What else?" Su Qingjun thought for a while and said, "The surface is quite rough and not very smooth. The grain of the tree is also ordinary. It shouldn't be some precious wood. The workmanship is SOSO. It doesn't look valuable and—" "Hey!" Lu Qin angrily stopped her and said impatiently, "You woman! Why do you think differently from ordinary people all the time? Let me ask you, this table is made of wood. Is it very heavy?" Su Qingjuan's fair fingers grabbed the edge of the table and lifted it. Then she looked at Lu Chen and said, "It's not heavy. Have you forgotten that I am Jin Dan Friar?" Lu Chen looked up at the sky and revealed an expression as if there was nothing left to live for. After a while, he lowered his head, as if he was barely controlling his emotions and the muscles on his face. He said, "Like this, you have to think of this table as the heaviest thing in the world. Because on top of it, it is the devil in your heart that you can't get rid of all these years. It is the hesitation and entanglement that you can't get rid of." Su Qingjuan's expression immediately darkened and turned solemn. Lu Chen's eyes lit up. He clapped his hands and said, "That's it. Then you can flip the table, as if you have gotten rid of all the devils in your heart." Flip? Flip the table. Boom! There was a loud noise, and the flying goose platform seemed to shake. A wooden table broke out of the house and flew high into the air. After a long while, it landed heavily on the ground and broke into pieces with a pa sound. The surroundings were quiet. After a while, Lu Chen's angry voice suddenly came from the dilapidated hut. He shouted, "Hey! Are you going to flip the table or tear down the hut?" Sorry. I am Jin Dan. I couldn't control myself. Shut up." "Oh." Chapter 161. Jin Dan Friar? What's so great about Jin Dan Friar? Just because you're a golden core cultivator, you can come here and destroy other people's houses? A series of complaints came from the thatched hut with a large hole in the roof. A gloomy Lu Chen was stepping on the broken pieces of the wooden table, trying hard to repair the hole in the roof. Far away from the door, beside the cave, the stone door was half open. Su Qingjun was standing by the door, looking a little guilty as she poked her head out to look at the thatched hut. Occasionally, she could hear the complaints that came with the wind, making her already pink cheeks even redder, revealing a soul-stirring beauty. She suddenly felt her face burning. She reached out and gently touched her cheeks, looking a little ashamed and guilty. But she didn't know why, but after a while, she suddenly snickered to herself, probably thinking of something that even she found too funny. "Flipping the table? What are you flipping? If you have so much strength, why don't you chop down trees?" Listening to the man who seemed to be complaining gloomily, Su Qingjun leaned against the door, suddenly covered her mouth with her hand and giggled, then turned and walked in. The stone door closed behind her, and only her light footsteps could be seen faintly as she walked into the depths of the cave. The matter was finally settled. But strangely, in the next 2 or 3 days, the Flying Goose Terrace was unexpectedly peaceful. No one came to disturb them. And the ripening of the eagle fruit also began to stabilize. Almost every day there would be 1 or 2 fruits ripening, and then Lu Chen would call Su Qingjun out to eat them. When the two met, they would chat, and their relationship seemed to become more familiar, occasionally joking. Such peaceful days made people feel unexpectedly comfortable, as if they were in a paradise. In the majestic Kunlun, in this vast world, the small Flying Goose Terrace seemed to be a small world for the two of them. In the middle of this, Masato Kihara came again, but at that time, Su Qingjuan's injuries had mostly recovered, and there seemed to be nothing wrong with her. After chatting for a while, Masato Kihara warned her a few things, and then left in a hurry. As for Lu Chen, whom he had a deep impression of before, Masato Kihara actually ignored him this time, which was a little strange. Because of this, Su Qingjun expressed a little doubt and puzzlement to Lu Chen, but Lu Chen was very narrow-minded and sharp, and said, "Your master probably wants to forget the reward he promised me." Su Qingjun was angry and amused at the same time, and only said that it was impossible. But when Lu Chen was about to argue with her, she floated away and only said, "It's still early today, I'm going back to sleep, to practice. If you need anything, use the Burning Heart Talisman to call me." On the 9th day of Lu Chen's stay in the Flying Goose Terrace, This morning, he got up as usual, looked at the newly repaired roof, touched the table that had been rebuilt with wood, and then went out to fetch water to wash his face. He looked at the rising sun, looked down at the sea of clouds, and walked around the Flying Goose Terrace, and then busied himself in the spiritual field. When the mountain wind blew over from the cliff, the old pine trees swayed slightly, and the leaves rustled. It felt like another beautiful and quiet day. Unfortunately, this peaceful and beautiful land did not last for too long. A sound from a distance broke the peace of the Flying Goose Terrace. Lu Chen stood up from the spiritual field, walked up the ridge, and looked in the direction of the mountain road, and then sighed softly. On the mountain road, the three brothers, Sumo, Su Qian, and Su Wen, were striding over. Lu Chen put down the things in his hands and looked down. He saw that his body, especially his trousers and shoes, were stained with black mud and dust, and there was a lot of it on his clothes. He did not look like a cultivator at all, and was obviously a tenant farmer. But it seemed that there was not much difference between a part-time disciple and a tenant farmer. Lu Chen muttered to himself, probably in a self-deprecating manner. Then, he clapped his hands and walked over. He stopped in front of the three Su brothers with a smile on his face about 30 to 40 feet away from the cave. "Senior Su brothers, long time no see." He smiled and cupped his hands and said, "How come you have time to come here today?" When the three saw Lu Chen, except for Sumo, who was standing in the middle, Su Qian and Su Wen all nodded, probably thinking that Lu Chen was now helping Su Qingjun. Although he was still far from the level of Su Qingjuan's confidence, he still had basic manners. But after a while, when they saw the black mud on Lu Chen's body and feet, the three of them immediately showed contempt and disgust, probably because they thought that Lu Chen was too dirty. "Yes." Su Wen casually responded, waved his hand as if he was shooing away flies, and said, "We want to see Sister June, don't block the way." With that, the three of them prepared to walk forward, but they had only taken 2 steps when they suddenly found that Lu Chen was still standing in the same place, blocking their way. Although he still had a gentle smile on his face, he had no intention of giving way. Su Biao frowned and said, "What is the meaning of this?" Just as Lu Chen was about to speak, he heard Sumo say coldly, "Stinking brat, don't look for a beating." Lu Chen paused, his gaze lingering on Sumo's face for a moment, but his expression did not change. He still smiled warmly at the three of them and said, "Three young masters, it's like this. These 2 days, Shiji Su clearly told us that she wants to practice a secret technique, so she will not see anyone for the time being." The expressions of the 3 Su family brothers changed. Sumo seemed to have the worst temper, at least in front of an odd-job disciple like Lu Chen, she was the worst. She opened her mouth and scolded, "Bullshit. You said you will go into seclusion, and you will not see her? Who do you think you are?" Lu Chen said, "My status is lowly, of course I cannot be compared to the 3 young Master Su. However, it is precisely because of this that I ask the 3 of you to think about it carefully. I am only an odd-job disciple. How would I dare to pretend to be the will of Shiji Su and recklessly obstruct you?" When these words came out, Su Qian and Su Wen were both startled, and their originally angry expressions eased a little. Su Qian pulled the furious Sumo and said in a low voice, "What he said is somewhat reasonable. Maybe Sister June really has something to do, and it is temporarily inconvenient for her to see us." Before Sumo could speak, Su Wen, who was at the side, already frowned and said, "Even if that is the case, we have already come, don't tell me we are going to go back like this." Su Qian said, "Otherwise, what do you want to do?" Sumo snorted and said, "How can I not know Sister June's temper? Everyone move aside, I will go over and knock on the door. If I do it a few more times, she will naturally come out to see us." Finished speaking, she casually walked forward. Lu Chen stood in the same place, and a trace of helplessness appeared on his face as he looked at Sumo. Sumo walked in front of him, and looked at Lu Chen from head to toe. She sneered and said, "Stinking brat, I think you have eaten the heart of a bear and the guts of a leopard. I have already said things like this, and you still dare to block my way?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "Young Master Su, with your status, I presume that you are also a reasonable person?" Bang! Suddenly, there was a muffled sound. It was Sumo who directly lifted her leg and kicked Lu Chen's lower abdomen. Immediately, Lu Chen was kicked to the ground, and he even rolled a few times on the ground. Lu Chen curled up his body. Probably because he had been kicked quite hard, he even began to cough violently, and at the same time, gasped for breath. "Speak your mother's reason." Sumo sneered. "Who do you think you are? Do you think you are qualified to speak reason with me?" After cursing the sentence, he swaggered past Lu Chen. Su Qian and Su Wen followed up, and indifferently glanced at Lu Chen, who was lying on the ground. Then they said to Sumo, How can you be so impulsive? In any case, this person is helping Sister June to plant trees. If you do this, it will not look good on Sister June," Sumo said indifferently. "Pick. A person with this kind of status dares to put on airs in front of us. Isn't that asking for a beating? So be it. So what if Sister June comes over? At most, she will only say a few words to us. It's not a big deal." "Oh, that's true." Su Qian and Su Wen both nodded in agreement. As they spoke, the three of them arrived at the stone door of the Abode of Immortals cave. They loudly knocked on the door and shouted, Sister June, come out for a moment. We have something to talk to you about." Lying on the ground, Lu Chen held his lower abdomen with both hands while looking at the stone door of the Abode of Immortals cave. After a while, only a rumbling sound could be heard. After a while, Su Qingjun expressionlessly walked out with a somewhat frosty temperament. It seemed that she was not in a good mood. The three brothers of the Su family simultaneously had the same feeling. However, they had long since become proficient in dealing with this sister. Immediately, they surrounded her and fought to be the first to speak. Su Qingjun listened with an indifferent expression. Her gaze passed over the three people surrounding her and saw Lu Chen, who had been beaten to the ground in front of her. She saw that his complexion was somewhat pale and that his hands were covering his abdomen. There was also a distinct footprint there. In the morning light, a shadow seemed to suddenly pass through her bright and clear eyes. She seemed to want to say something, to do something, but she slowly lowered her head. Lu Chen lay on the ground. His face did not have much of an expression. He only quietly looked at her. After a while, Su Qingjun suddenly ignored the three noisy brothers. She clenched her teeth and strode towards the thatched cottage in the distance. Not long after, she arrived in front of the thatched cottage. She pushed open the door and walked in. The three brothers of the Su family looked at each other in dismay. There was a puzzled expression on their faces. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed. He smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, "Why do you insist on going to my thatched cottage? I don't believe that there is no table in your cave residence." Bang! Suddenly, a loud sound came from the thatched cottage. Lu Chen and the three brothers of the Su family looked together. They saw a wooden table break out of the house, smashing a big hole in the roof of the thatched cottage. It flew up high and then fell down heavily. With a crackling sound, it was immediately smashed into pieces. After a while, Su Qingjun slowly walked out of the house. The expression on her face was somewhat strange. She seemed to be a little nervous, but strangely, there was also some inexplicable excitement. Her hands were clenched into fists. If you looked closely, you could even see that her hands were faintly trembling. It seemed that she was very nervous and excited. She fixed her gaze on Sumo and the others. Then she slowly walked over. Sumo laughed heartily and greeted her. She laughed loudly and said, Sister June, I know that you are still the best to me. Just now, this blind servant tried to stop me and did not let me see you. I kicked him away. See, you are still the best to me." Before he finished speaking, Su Qingjun had already walked in front of him. Suddenly, her eyes shone with a strange light. She seemed excited and agitated. Her eyes were surging violently like the waves of the sea. Just as Sumo danced and ran over, the woman suddenly lifted her foot. It was as if the scene just now was replaying in an instant. Su Qingjun kicked Sumo's stomach. Then, there was a scream like a pig being slaughtered. Sumo's whole body was kicked up into the air. With a bang, she was kicked directly onto the hard mountain wall. At the same time, accompanied by a few clear sounds of bones breaking, she rolled down. The wind blew over Yantai Mountain. It was silent in an instant. Everyone held their breath, dumbstruck. Chapter 162. Lu Chen laid on the ground and laid his body flat. Looking at the sky, he saw that it was an azure blue, so clear that it was almost transparent. Then he smiled slightly. Not far from him, Sumo was sent flying by Su Qingjuan's kick. After rolling down the hard stone wall, she seemed to have lost her mind in an instant. Not only had her eyes turned white, her hands were waving randomly, as if trying to grab onto some illusory life-saving straw. Her mouth was also muttering some gibberish that no one could understand. On the other side, Su Qian and Su Wen were completely scared silly. They stood motionless on the spot, staring at Su Qingjun with wide eyes, as if they had seen the most terrifying and inconceivable thing in their lives. After a long while, Su Qian stammered, Jun, Sister Jun, why did you kick Sumo? Su Qingjun turned around and looked at Su Qian. Her gaze was so cold that it was as if a basin of ice water had been poured on Su Qian's head. In an instant, the chill seeped into his bones, causing Su Qian to swallow back the words he was about to say. His forehead was also covered in cold sweat. Su Qingjun walked in front of Su Qian and Su Wen, looking at them expressionlessly. She asked indifferently, "Do you have any dissatisfaction?" These 5 words were not spoken quickly. Every word was heard clearly, but for some reason, Su Qian only felt a chill run down his spine. Under Su Qingjuan's cold gaze, he subconsciously shook his head. Who knew that at this moment, Su Wen, who was standing beside him, might have not been directly stared at by Su Qingjuan's strange gaze. He actually still had some courage left and said in a low voice, "Sister Jun, how can you be like this? You can't hit us?" A crisp sound rang out. Su Qian clearly saw that fair and beautiful palm suddenly swing up, and a slap landed on Su Wen's face. Su Wen floated backwards, clutching his face and howling in pain as he fell to the ground, rolling several times. Lu Chen, who was lying on the ground, noticed another strange detail. After Su Qingjun slapped him to her heart's content, she suddenly clenched her fists and bit her red lips with her pearly white teeth. Her breathing was slightly rapid, and she even panted a few times. She seemed to have relaxed after a moment of nervousness. After taking a deep breath, Su Qingjun looked at Su Qian again and asked softly, "Can I hit you?" Su Qian's face was drained of all color. With a pu sound, he directly knelt down, stammering, "Yes, yes. Sister Jun, please spare my life." Su Qian and Su Wen, who had crawled up from the ground, were also scared out of their wits. The two of them dragged the unconscious Sumo, who was already foaming at the mouth, and ran in a sorry state up the mountain path. Su Qingjun watched the 3 figures disappear into the distance. She was silent for a long time, the expression on her face fluctuating. Her chest heaved up and down, as if there were all kinds of intense emotions surging in her heart. She couldn't calm them down for a long time. After a while, she silently turned around and walked to the side of Lu Chen, who was still lying on the ground. She glanced at him and asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I was kicked in the stomach. Look, there are footprints on this shirt." Lu Chen pointed at the footprint left by Sumo and said to Su Qingjun. When Su Qingjun saw his expression and tone of voice, the trace of worry on her face finally dissipated. She couldn't help but laugh. However, she felt that it was somewhat inappropriate to look down on Lu Chen like this, so she simply squatted down. She placed her hands on her knees and propped her chin up. There was a somewhat strange smile on her face, as if she wanted to open her mouth to ask something, but was somewhat hesitant. Unknowingly, she was lost in thought. After a while, she suddenly called out to Lu Chen. "What?" Lu Chen lay on the ground and glanced at the beautiful girl squatting beside him. Su Qingjun laughed before saying anything. Then, her cheeks slightly reddened, but she seemed to be secretly delighted. She said to him, Did I look very impressive just now?" Lu Chen nodded his head heavily and sternly said, "Extremely impressive." Su Qingjun sighed and looked at her palm. She said, "That feeling just now. How do I put it, it was very strange." Tell me about it. There was clearly a voice in my heart that kept telling me that I shouldn't hit him, but after I really kicked him like that, my heart suddenly felt very, very comfortable. Lu Chen looked at her with a smile and said, "Do you feel that the things that were pressing on your heart in the past suddenly disappeared?" Su Qingjun took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, even my body feels much more relaxed." After a pause, she suddenly raised her hand and waved it in the air. There was a trace of yearning on her face. She softly said to herself, "I really want to hit him again." Lu Chen was startled. He turned over and sat up. "It's fine if you just let it out for a while. How can it be so exaggerated?" Su Qingjun pursed her lips and laughed. She said, "I'm just saying it casually. But I really didn't expect that your method would actually. She was momentarily at a loss for words, as if she couldn't think of a particularly good way to describe it. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "Don't think about it. It's fine as long as it's useful." Su Qingjun hugged her knees. She looked like a girl who had returned to her childhood. She giggled, and her face exuded a bright radiance with an unusually beautiful joy. "Will there be trouble later?" Lu Chen climbed up from the ground and patted the dust off his body. Su Qingjun thought for a moment and said, "There should be. The three of them have been spoiled since they were young. When they return, they will definitely complain." Lu Chen said, "Then have you thought about how to deal with it?" Su Qingjun shrugged. She seemed a little mischievous and a little lazy. She said indifferently, "Who cares? We'll see when the time comes." Oh. It was unknown whether the news of Su Qingjuan's sudden outburst and beating up the three Su family brothers unexpectedly spread. In the following days, the Flying Goose Terrace was abnormally quiet. No one came to disturb them. Lu Chen sighed and gloomily went to repair the roof of the thatched hut. Then he went to the forest behind the Flying Goose Terrace to cut a few pieces of wood to build a table. But this time, he simply put the table outside the door. Su Qingjun came over and saw it. She was very surprised and asked him why he did this. Lu Chen said seriously, "In the future, you can flip the table if you want. You're the Jin Dan and you're the boss. But don't ever tear down my house again. I only have a broken thatched hut here. It can't withstand any more trouble." At that moment, Su Qingjuan's face turned red. She looked like a messy white flower with a hint of red in the wind. She was very angry and complained to Lu Chen for a long time, but he refused. She complained that the table was extremely ugly, poorly made, and unsightly. If someone saw it outside and this matter was leaked, she would lose face in the mountains of Kunlun. Coincidentally, there was an eagle fruit that had ripened. The two walked to the spiritual field. Su Qingjun directly threw it into her mouth and ate it. When her mouth was still bulging, she grabbed Lu Chen and refused to let him go. She said angrily, "Wait here." Lu Chen had no choice but to wait for her. He sat on the ridge of the field and watched the scenery. When the wind blew over the cliff, he suddenly found that the cliff rocks seemed to be covered with beautiful wildflowers overnight. Later, after Su Qingjun catalyzed the medicine, she stared at him and used both carrot and stick tactics to persuade him. In the end, Lu Chen was pestered by her. Seeing that dusk was coming, he could only say, "Then you can't casually tear down my house in the future." Su Qingjun repeatedly waved her hand and said with a smile that she wouldn't tear it down. Lu Chen looked at her suspiciously and said, "Do you keep your word?" Su Qingjun said, "Of course I keep my word. You must believe me." Lu Chen said, "Of course I believe you." Then he shook his head and sighed. He moved the ugly and crudely made table back and put it back in the thatched hut. Su Qingjun immediately became happy. She was in a good mood as she strolled around the Flying Goose platform. That fiery red feather shawl shone brightly on her shoulders, setting off her beautiful face. When the sun set, she even jokingly said to Lu Chen that if she knew that it would be so peaceful now, she would have fought earlier. To this, Lu Chen naturally did not comment. He only smiled and did not speak. Such relaxed and happy days passed by quickly. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 days had passed. The eagle fruit on the Flying Goose platform had already been eaten. Su Qingjuan's cultivation in the Jindan realm had finally completely eliminated all the hidden dangers and flaws and completely stabilized. Then, Lu Chen was about to leave. That day, he personally plucked the last ripe eagle fruit and handed it to Su Qingjun, who was standing at the side. He smiled and congratulated her. Then he turned and went to his thatched hut to pack his luggage. Su Qingjun held the last fruit and seemed a little emotional. She quietly stared at the fruit in her palm. After a long while, she slowly ate it. When he went down the mountain, Su Qingjun came over to send him off. It was when the sun was setting. The light shone on the boundless sea of clouds. Rays of golden light shone down, elongating their shadows. The two smiled at each other and waved goodbye. Before he left, Su Qingjun called out to him again. "If you need my help in the future, you can come to me." Lu Chen smiled. "That good?" Su Qingjun smiled. "Yes. I still owe you a lot of favors." Lu Chen laughed. He nodded to her. He then strode down the mountain path. When he was about to turn a corner, he looked back. In the distance, on the other side of the flying goose platform, the beautiful figure was still standing there under the setting sun. Then she seemed to see him looking back. She stretched out an arm and waved at him from afar. At that moment, the sunset filled the sky. It was as beautiful as a burning fire. Chapter 163. The 30-Feet Peak of Kunlun Mountain. This was a mountain peak in the towering Kunlun mountain range. Its name was rather peculiar, but the mountain itself was not only 30 feet high. The mountain that was only 30 feet high was called a mound. There were several explanations for the origin of this mountain's name, but the most well-known one was that there was a clear spring at the top of the mountain. The water vapor was rising, and whenever the sun shone down, a 30-feet rainbow would appear on the mountain peak. This was why the mountain was named 30 feet. In the middle of the 30-feet peak, there was a spiritual cave. The cave door was tightly shut, and a layer of fallen leaves had fallen at the door. Dust was everywhere, and it seemed that it had been closed for a long time. However, on this day, there were many people standing near and far outside the cave. Among them, there were two women, one old and one young. They were Jean Dan Friar, Melaleuca japonica, and Xianxia. At the same time, from the 30-feet peak, a strange whistling sound could be heard from time to time. It was like the roar of a dragon or the howl of a hurricane. It was as if there was a mysterious principle that resonated with the heavens and the earth, resonating with the mountains and rivers. It made people feel as if there was a giant beast that was about to awaken from its slumber. An inexplicable but incomparably abundant power seemed to be contained in this mountain. Like a butterfly that was about to break out of its cocoon, it slowly flapped its wings and whistled. Xianxia's face was full of worry. Her eyes stared unblinkingly at the tightly shut stone door of the cave. Her hand tightly grasped Melaleuca japonica's hand, and she seemed to be so nervous that it was difficult for her to even breathe. As for Melaleuca japonica, although her expression was relatively calm, there was a trace of hidden anxiety in her eyes. Like this, they waited outside the cave for a full 2 hours. However, there was no further change in the cave. Instead, even the strange roar of the dragon and tiger had slowly subsided. The various people on the 30-feet peak showed a trace of disappointment on their faces. Some people had already begun to turn around and leave. Xianxia, who was standing at the very front, turned pale and her hands and feet went cold. Melaleuca japonica seemed to feel something and sighed softly. She held Xianxia's little hand and hugged her gently. She said softly, it's okay. Don't worry." Xianxia's eyes were misty, and she looked sad. Even her voice seemed to be choking with sobs as she said, "Martial uncle, why hasn't Master come out?" Melaleuca japonica shook her head and said softly, "Silly child, the Yuanying state is a huge life and death trial. It's not that easy to pass. Don't be too anxious." Xianxia bit her lip and said, "But you clearly said that the tiger and dragon sound is a sign of a breakthrough." Melaleuca japonica nodded and said, "That is indeed the case, and the sound of dragons and tigers is an auspicious sign." Xianxia smiled bitterly and said, "But for 7 consecutive days, it sounded every day and then fell silent again. Why is this? Melaleuca japonica slowly shook her head and said, when breaking through to the Yuanying state, there are thousands of illusions. It's difficult to see all of them. Moreover, the person breaking through the realm is different. Their techniques are different, their cultivation is different, and their state of mind is different. There are all kinds of subtle differences in the signs. She gently stroked Xian's soft black hair and said gently, good girl, we can only wait patiently and hope that your master is a good person. Xian nodded blankly, but the worry on her face still lingered. Her bright eyes only stared at the cave. Melaleuca japonica sighed in her heart and turned to look at the surroundings. After the tiger and dragon sound weakened, more than half of the surrounding onlookers had dispersed. Only a few people were still standing far away and looking in their direction. Suddenly, her eyes narrowed slightly. She saw a young man standing under an old pine tree in the distance. It was he. Melaleuca japonica frowned slightly, obviously not expecting he to come here. He also quickly noticed Melaleuca japonica's gaze. After looking in their direction, he smiled at Melaleuca japonica. His expression was somewhat respectful, obviously expressing that he had no ill intentions. Melaleuca japonica hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly at him. In any case, he was a talented disciple with a bright future. What happened a few days ago, in fact, really had nothing to do with him. Melaleuca japonica herself actually didn't have any deep hatred with he. She just didn't know why he was guarding the entrance of Dongfang Tao's cave. What did he want to do? Yen Luo slowly turned her head and looked at the cave, only to hear that the sounds of dragons and tigers in the cave were getting softer and softer, and finally could not be heard anymore. Kunwa City, Black Hill Pavilion. Ping ping pang pang, pai li pa la. A series of strange noises rang out. In the courtyard, Old Ma was dumbstruck as he watched Lu Chen throw all the dishes he brought to go with wine, such as fried peanuts, pickled radishes, salted duck eggs, and so on, into the garbage basket. He shouted in astonishment, "What are you doing?" Lu Chen looked at this fatty with contempt. His eyes were filled with the superiority of a nouveau riche. Then he leisurely took out plate after plate of delicacies from the bag he carried with him. In the blink of an eye, the small dining table between them was filled with delicacies, and he even patted several layers of them. Old Ma's mouth was wide open. While drooling, he cried out in alarm, "Damn! You brat, you're not a spy anymore, but a bandit." How many restaurants in Kunwa City did you rob? Rob my ass. Lu Chen said proudly, "I bought all of these." Old Ma stared at him as if he had seen a ghost. He stammered, "You bought them?" Lu Chen snorted coldly. It seemed he didn't want to answer this retarded fatty's question. He reached out to grab the jug of wine the fatty was holding and casually threw it away. Old Ma screamed in pain. "That's the good wine I specially left. 1 jug of good wine for 1 spirit stone." Bang! A muffled sound interrupted the fatty's wailing. In a heroic manner, Lu Chen placed a jug of old wine in front of Old Ma. He squinted at him and said, 50 spirit stones for 1 jug of Huadiao wine. Which one do you want to drink?" Old Ma was dumbstruck. His eyes widened. A moment later, he shouted, F***ck this broken wine. I want to drink Huadiao wine. Good wine. Good wine. Old Ma happily took a big gulp and clicked his tongue. Then, he impatiently reached out and tore off a leg meat from an unknown immortal bird or spiritual beast from the mountain of delicacies on the table. With his mouth full of oil, he chewed with a satisfied expression on his face. Lu Chen looked much more refined. He sat across from Old Ma and drank wine. He picked up a piece of food with his chopsticks and said with a smile, "What do you think? I'm a good friend, aren't I? I remember all the good things I get from you." "Good brother, dog friend." Old Ma raised the bird leg in his hand and gestured to him. Lu Chen was furious and cursed, F***ck. I bought you so many delicious food and drinks, but you actually called me a dog? Old Ma was shocked. He quickly swallowed the big piece of meat in his mouth and said with a smile, "Wrong, wrong. You heard wrong. I said good friend." He gave Lu Chen a thumbs up and said seriously, "In the whole world, I think you are the best friend. Good brother. That's more like it." Lu Chen angrily glared at him again. Then, he picked up the wine bowl and drank a mouthful of wine. Old Ma looked at him with a smile and then asked carefully, I say, Lu Chen, you suddenly became so rich. What happened? Lu Chen snorted and said, I earned it with my own ability. Old Ma raised his eyebrows and said, Tell me about it. Damn it. How could there be such a good thing in Kunlun? If I had known, I would have gone in myself. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, It's not a big deal. Then, he roughly told him what happened with Su Qingjun these days. Old Ma's eyes opened wider and wider as he listened. The way he looked at Lu Chen also became more and more strange. In the end, when Lu Chen finished, Old Ma frowned and said, I say, why do I feel that your money is a bit like you are living off a woman? Bullsh *T. Lu Chen flew into a rage and kicked him. He said, Damn fatty, spit out what you just ate. Old Ma laughed heartily and dodged, saying, This money is too good, too good. It's all because of your cleverness and resourcefulness. Lu Chen scolded him a few more times and then sat down. Old Ma smiled and sat beside him. After thinking carefully for a while, his face became more serious and he asked him softly, So, you and Su Qingjun have also stayed on the same mountain for more than 20 days. How about it? Do you think Su Qingjun is still a suspect? Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then slowly shook his head and said, I think she should not be a big suspect. Old Ma squinted his eyes slightly and said, Oh, so sure? Lu Chen picked up the wine bowl but did not drink it. He only rotated it gently in his palm and lightly said, Su Qingjun, this girl, on the outside, looks perfect and flawless. Talented, good family background, diligent in training and amazing skills. But after getting along with her for a long time, it is very easy to find a big flaw in her character. He smiled and said, If the evil sect has handed over the fate of the entire sect to such a person, then we have nothing to be afraid of. We just have to sit here and wait. I think the evil sect will not have more than a few days of fate. Old Ma nodded his head and said, That makes sense. Lu Chen stared at the bowl of wine in his hand. He watched the transparent and slightly yellow wine gently swaying. After a while, he suddenly said, Old Ma, do you think I am a cruel person? Old Ma was stunned for a moment. He frowned and said, Everything is fine, why do you say that? Lu Chen's lips twitched slightly, his eyes lowered and glimmered. After a while, he said, When I discovered Su Qingjuan's weakness, in that moment, I suddenly discovered that I had already thought of 7 or 8 ways. I can coerce her friends and relatives, I can assassinate her, I can even force her to go crazy. The courtyard was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping on the ground could be heard. He slowly raised his head and looked at Old Ma. He quietly said, All of these things, I have not thought about it in detail. But like instinct, in that instant, I had the thought of harming someone. Chapter 164. Old Ma also became silent, looked at Lu Chen for a while, took the jar of wine and poured himself a full bowl. Come, have a sip. He gently raised the bowl in front of him. Lu Chen nodded, picked up the bowl in his hand and clinked it with him. I think, both of us are not good people. Old Ma smiled, then said, Your hands are stained with a lot of blood, I have also killed people. But what can we do? You and I are both walking this path, can we still turn back? Lu Chen made a sound of N, and did not speak. Old Ma drank another mouthful of wine, then lightly said, As for being cruel or not, it is actually meaningless. Could it be that after you stop being cruel, others will not kill you? Those evil sect remnants who have been wanting to grind your bones and scatter your ashes for the past 10 years will let you go? Lu Chen smiled and said, You are too good at comforting people. Old Ma also laughed, then looked at Lu Chen meaningfully and said, I feel that you seem a little strange. What do you mean? Old Ma said, You never asked this question in the past. Killing is killing. You don't even blink. That's the original you. But I found that ever since you went up to Kunlun Mountain, there seems to be something strange about you. He leaned his fat body forward, lowered his voice, a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes, looked at Lu Chen with a smile that was not a smile and said, Why, found your conscience? Want to be a good person? Lu Chen's eyes slightly narrowed. After a moment he suddenly laughed and scolded, "Damn good person, your father, specialize in killing good people." Saying that, he turned his hand and directly smashed the wine bowl towards Old Ma's head. Old Ma laughed, retracted his head, then smiled and waved his hand, said, "Don't think of touching me, I am not a good person. We have done that kind of thing all our lives. Don't let your imagination run wild, don't you think?" Lu Chen laughed, then looked up at the sky. Above the square courtyard, there was a small square of blue sky, as if it was the whole world in his eyes. So, he laughed even more happily, even to the point of coughing in the end, closing his eyes. "By the way, there is one more thing I want to tell you," Old Ma said carelessly. Lu Chen nodded and said, "And what is it?" "I received some news that recently, someone in the city seems to be secretly searching for cinnabar." Lu Chen's hand paused for a moment. He glanced at Old Ma and asked calmly, "Who is it?" "I still don't know. It is said that the person who did this is also very careful. He often changes his appearance so that others can't recognize him. In addition, there are so many shops in Kunwa City and so many cultivators come and go, so it is very difficult to find him." Lu Chen frowned and said, "Then how did you know?" Old Ma smiled and said, "Recently, people in several big shops have been asked about these things. In addition to inquiring about the quantity of cinnabar sold, those people also asked about the identity and origin of the people who bought large quantities of cinnabar." Lu Chen slightly raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "Would those shops casually tell others about this?" "Of course not, ordinary people." Old Ma said, "However, when the shopkeepers of a few shops spread the news, they revealed that they should have seen the tokens of the Kunlun party. You know, in Kunwa City, no one dares to not give face to the Kunlun party." Lu Chen frowned and said, "The Kunlun party?" Old Ma said indifferently, "I think it's most likely because some evildoer of the devil cult went too far on the mountain some time ago and attracted the attention of famous sections." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Can they find you?" Old Ma took a sip of wine from his bowl and said, "They can't." Lu Chen looked at him and said, "How can you be so sure? Kunwa City is the territory of the Kunlun party. Nothing can be hidden from them here." Old Ma sneered and said, "You're right, but I didn't buy cinnabar in Kunwa City. You can't catch me, can you?" Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. A moment later, his eyes revealed a trace of understanding and he said, Could it be that you went out of town to buy it?" Old Ma sighed and said, "People like me who do dirty work, besides cleaning up after you people all day, always have to think of ways to live longer." Lu Chen couldn't help laughing. He reached out and patted Old Ma's shoulder and said, "Come on, I know you're the best in this business. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel at ease putting my life in your hands. Get lost." Old Ma reprimanded him without any trace of politeness. "Can you find out who did this?" Lu Chen asked Old Ma. Old Ma frowned and said, "Is it necessary? In any case, it's definitely someone from the Kunlun party." Lu Chen said, "In any case, I still want to know who's secretly dealing with us. Even if it's to make myself more confident, we might have a chance to meet again in the future on Mount Kunlun." Old Ma narrowed his eyes and said with a faint smile, "What do you want to do when we meet?" "Nothing. What else can I do?" Lu Chen spread his hands, looking harmless to both humans and animals. Old Ma clicked his tongue and immediately nodded. "Fine, I'll go check, but it won't be that fast. We still have to be cautious about these things." "I know, there's no hurry." After coming out of the Black Hill Pavilion and leaving the secluded alley, he walked 2 more streets before his eyes suddenly became lively. There were many shops on both sides of the long street and cultivators coming and going were like carps crossing the river. At a glance, it seemed like people from all over the world could be seen. Lu Chen quietly walked on the lively street. The people around him passed by one. The noise, laughter, curses, and all the other lively sounds seemed to be automatically separated from him by a small distance. It was difficult to get close, and they were isolated from each other. It was as if he was always standing outside of this hustle and bustle. Even if he was actually in it, he could not really integrate into it. He walked slowly, and there was always a sense of loneliness that followed him like a shadow. This feeling was not good. Most of the time, it would always make people depressed. Even people who had long been used to it would not like it. Until he suddenly saw a familiar figure in front of him. For some reason, he suddenly wanted to chat with someone, so he smiled and caught up to her, calling out, "EXN." The woman in front of him was startled and looked back. After seeing that it was Lu Chen, she breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on her originally somewhat worried face. She said, "Brother Lu, it's you." Lu Chen said with a smile, "How come you're here?" EXN said, "Something happened at home, so I came back for a while. I'm on my way back to the mountain now." "Brother Lu, what about you? Seeing that you actually have time to come to Kunwa City today, could it be that you've already finished your business on Sister Su's side?" Lu Chen said, "That's right. You actually don't know?" EXN sighed and said, I haven't been in the mood to think about anything else lately, so I've been paying attention to my master." She then roughly told Lu Chen about the situation on 30 Feet Peak. Lu Chen nodded and said, "No wonder I haven't seen you these past few days. But if there's a strange sign with your master, he might come out of his closed-door meditation at any time. Why do you still dare to go down the mountain?" EXIN's expression became a bit more unsightly, and with a bit of worry, she said with a bitter smile, "Since yesterday, there hasn't been any sound from the Immortals' cave on 30 Feet Peak. I'm also very worried about my master, but Marshal Uncle Melaleuca Japonica said there won't be any news for the time being, so I have to slowly wait. She told me to take this opportunity to go down the mountain and take a look." For a moment, Lu Chen also didn't know what to say, so he could only comfort her. "Alright, you don't need to worry too much. Your Marshal Uncle Yan's experience is 100 times better than ours. Since she's not worried, presumably nothing serious has happened for the time being." EXN nodded lightly and said, "Brother Lu, do you still want to stroll around in this city? I'm still worried about my master, so I'll go back to the mountain first." Lu Chen said, "Let's go together. In any case, I don't have anything else to do." EXN said, and her expression seemed to soften a bit. The two of them turned around and walked away. Just as they were about to walk out of the bustling long street, they suddenly saw a group of people walking in front of them. The way they walked looked a bit arrogant and despotic, swaggering as if they didn't put the people around them in their eyes. Lu Chen glanced ahead and frowned slightly. Just as he was about to pull EXIN to the side to make way, someone in front of them suddenly saw them. Someone immediately cried out in alarm, and then someone pointed at Lu Chen and cursed. Suddenly, 7 or 8 people came over, surrounding Lu Chen and EXIN in the middle. EXIN was stunned, but then she immediately recognized the people in front of her. In a loud voice, she said, "Su Qian, Su Wen, what do you want?" Those people were members of the Su family, led by Su Qian and Su Wen. As for Sumo, she didn't see her. Perhaps it was because she was beaten too hard by Su Qingjun that day that her injuries still hadn't healed. Su Qian glanced at EXN with a slightly surprised expression. He then coldly snorted and said, "So it's you, little girl from the E family." In Kunwa City, the Su family was far more powerful than the E family. Usually, Su Qian, Su Wen, and Sumo didn't treat EXIN well. But no matter what, the two families were considered neighbors in the same city. Occasionally, the Su family would go to the E family to ask for tea, so they were always polite. At this moment, Su Qian also waved his hand and shouted, "Pull her away." From the side, someone rushed over. One person stopped EXIN, while the other 4 or 5 people grabbed Lu Chen. Lu Chen didn't fight back. From the beginning, he had a faint smile on his face. He indifferently looked at Su Qian and Su Wen. At this moment, he even smiled and said, "What? Young Master Su, do you want to vent your anger on me?" Su Qian walked over with a sneer on his face. He looked at Lu Chen with disdain and reached out his hand to slap Lu Chen's face. He sneered and said, "What? You're not convinced?" Lu Chen slightly narrowed his eyes, and a dark shadow flashed in the depths of his eyes. Chapter 165. Bah! Su Wen said angrily, "Who do you think you are? It must be you who provoked Sister June all day long, making her angry at us. If we don't teach you a lesson, you're going to overturn the heavens." Su Qian sneered and said, "Brother Mo has long wanted to vent his anger on this guy. Capture him for me and let Brother Mo teach him a good lesson." Su Wen laughed loudly. He walked over and suddenly raised his foot, kicking Lu Chen's thigh. He grinned hideously and said, "Go on and shout. Go on and drag him. Let's see if anyone will stand up for you today." "Hey, what are you doing?" Xianxia, who was at the side, shouted loudly with a frightened and angry expression. However, the people of the Su family didn't pay attention to her and directly pushed her to the side. Then, a large group of people escorted Lu Chen, pushing and hitting him all the way to the Su family's mansion. Xianxia was so anxious that she stomped her feet. She wanted to save him, but she didn't know what to do. If she went home and called for help, the Yi family couldn't compare to the Su family, so they certainly didn't want to offend the people of the Su family. If she went back to the mountain, Lu Chen was just an ordinary part-time disciple. No one would be willing to stand up for him. After thinking it over, Xianxia suddenly clenched her teeth and ran in the direction of Mount Kunlun. At this time, she could only beg the elders she knew. She hoped that Martial Uncle Melaleuca Japonica would be merciful and come down the mountain to save Lu Chen for the sake of her usual love for him. But would there really be people who would be willing to offend the wealthy and powerful Su clan in Kunwa City for the sake of an insignificant part-time disciple? Moreover, the Su clan had a genius born in their clan and was destined to be prosperous for many years to come. Even if it was Jean Dan Friar of the Kunlun party? Xianxia did not dare to think about these things, because she was afraid that if she thought about it carefully, she would not even have the courage to run to Kunlun Mountain. "Brother Lu, wait for me. I'll definitely find someone to save you." There were tears of anxiety in the corner of the girl's eyes, and she desperately ran towards Kunlun Mountain. In Kunwa City, the Su family's residence was also a famous luxurious courtyard. After all, it had been flourishing for many years. It was located in a good location and was very eye-catching. Therefore, when a group of people walked back with a person in custody, it immediately attracted the attention of many passers-by. Of course, the Su residence's main gate was also very imposing, and there was even a special gatehouse next to it. At this moment, when they heard the commotion, several servants and guards ran out. When they saw the commotion, they were immediately dumbfounded and looked at each other in dismay. Not long after, Su Qian, Su Wen, and the others brought Lu Chen to the main entrance and were about to enter without a care in the world. The guards at the side pushed and shoved each other. Finally, an old man who looked a bit old walked up and said with a bitter smile, "Young masters, what are you doing?" Su Qian snorted and said, "Old Li, us two brothers caught a thief on the road, so we brought him back to teach him a good lesson." Old Li glanced at Lu Chen in the crowd, and his complexion slightly changed. He forced a smile and said in a low voice, "Young master, what he's wearing inside is the Kunlun party's disciple uniform, right?" Su Qian frowned and turned his head to take a look. Sure enough, he saw that Lu Chen's coat was only an ordinary piece of clothing, but after the pushing and shoving just now, the clothes underneath were revealed. It was precisely the Kunlun party's disciple uniform. Su Qian was somewhat hesitant. After all, this was Kunwa City. If he wanted to casually punish a Kunlun disciple, it wouldn't look too good, even if it was only an insignificant odd-job disciple. However, at this moment, Su Wen, who was standing to the side, sneered and suddenly raised his voice, saying, "Who saw it? Who saw it?" As he said this, he walked over and pulled Lu Chen's clothes tightly, covering the disciple uniform. He sneered at Lu Chen and said, "Stinking brat, you'll die today." From the beginning until now, Lu Chen still didn't have any intention of resisting. He just stood in the same place and indifferently looked at Su Wen. After a moment he suddenly grinned. Su Wen suddenly felt that the smile was exceptionally dazzling, and he angrily said, "Bring him in. Damn it, when I ruthlessly punish you, if you can still smile, I'll change my surname to yours." Old Li, who was standing to the side, repeatedly shook his head. He was an old and experienced man, so how could he not see that there was something fishy going on? However, he also knew that these young masters of his family were used to being domineering, and they weren't people he could persuade. Thus, the group of people just passed by and casually entered the Su residence. The people in the gatehouse could do nothing about it. Old Li frowned and sighed, oh no, something bad is going to happen. Someone from the side came over and asked in a low voice, Uncle Li, what should we do now? Before Old Li could speak, another servant said, Old Master is out and not at home. How about, I go and report to Madam? Shut up, Old Li said unhappily, these two young masters and young Master Sumo, Madam usually spoils them the most. If you go over and say something bad, do you believe that the three young masters will come over and break your legs before chasing you out of the house? That servant immediately became silent out of fear, and the people at the side were also at a loss. Someone said, then we don't care. Old Li let out a long sigh and stamped his feet, saying, forget it, we are just servants anyway, how can we care so much? All the servants nodded in agreement, but when they looked at the back of the group of people in the depths of the Su residence, their eyes revealed a bit of sympathy. On this day, Kunlun Mountain was sunny, and there were many disciples going up and down the mountain. Most of them had a relaxed expression, so when a young girl hurriedly rushed up the mountain path and ran forward with all her might, it was especially eye-catching. Many people saw the figure of Xianxia rushing over, and most of them took the initiative to make a path for her. Occasionally, there were people who knew her and would ask a question, but Xianxia often did not have the time to answer and only ran forward with an anxious face. Many people looked at her back in disgust. Later, it was unknown who said it, but then many people knew that the young girl was the girl who had caused a stir in the Kunlun party in the incident of Gang forcing a marriage. So much so that even the faint scar on Xianxia's cheek was picked up and talked about. But these gossips, Xianxia did not care. She ran all the way, and only felt that the mountain path was unusually long, so long that she started to hate herself for being too weak. Why couldn't she be like some cultivators like Jin Dan Friar and Yuanying, who had magical powers and could fly in the air? No matter how long the road was, she could still reach it in the blink of an eye. After such a long time, would Brother Lu have met with an accident? He wouldn't be injured, right? Those abominable Su family people, would they do something to him? Xianxia felt that she was so anxious that she was about to cry. Finally, when her eyes were about to blur, she saw the shadow of Melaleuca japonica in the main hall of the flowing fragrance garden. There was someone in the quiet room. Xianxia did not even think and directly rushed in. The usual rules and etiquette were all thrown to the 9 heavens. In a moment, the door made a heavy and ear-piercing sound. There were 2 people in the room, sitting facing each other and talking. One of them was Melaleuca japonica. At this moment, she turned her head and stood up in shock, looked at Xianxia and said, You? What happened to you? Martial Ant, I beg you to help me, you must help me. Xianxia with a sobbing tone rushed over, grabbed Melaleuca japonica's arm, shook it and said. Melaleuca japonica misunderstood. She sighed and gently stroked Xianxia's hair. With a kind expression on her face, she said, Ai, good child, don't be too anxious. Didn't I tell you earlier that your master indeed has difficulties in making the breakthrough, but it's still too early to say that he will fail. We still need to wait patiently for a while, so don't worry too much. Xianxia repeatedly shook her head and said, No, Martial Ant, I have a friend who ran into trouble in Kunwa City and was taken away. You help me go save him. Melaleuca japonica was startled, then she immediately frowned and said, What exactly happened? Tell me clearly. Although Xianxia was anxious, she still had to tell her, so she roughly told her what happened on the street in Kunwa City. In the end, she said anxiously, Martial Ant, Big Brother Luchan was taken to the Su family. Quickly go save him. Luchan? The Su family? At this time, a slightly surprised voice suddenly came from the side. Xianxia turned to look and was suddenly startled. She saw that the other person sitting across from Melaleuca japonica was actually Su Qingjun. When she came in just now, she was too anxious, so she didn't notice her. Now, she was also stunned. Looking at Su Qingjun's surprised expression, she didn't know what to say. After a long time, she awkwardly called out, "Younger sister Su." Su Qingjuan's expression didn't look too good. She said gloomily, "Younger sister Ixin, who took Lu Qin away?" Xian secretly glanced at her. After a moment of hesitation, she said in a low voice, "It was Su Qian and Su Wen. They brought 7 or 8 people. Brother Lu didn't even have time to fight back before he was taken away by them." Anger flashed across Su Qingjuan's face, but she quickly suppressed it. She turned to Melaleuca japonica and said, "Martial Aunt Yen, in short, thank you very much for the eagle fruit. In the future, Qingjun will definitely repay you. I have something to do today, so I will take my leave first." Melaleuca japonica nodded and said, It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. You don't need to take it to heart." Su Qingjun bowed, turned around, and strode out. When she passed by Ixin, her gaze swept over Xian's anxious face. Her footsteps paused for a moment, then she said in a soft voice, "Younger sister, don't worry. Lu Qin should be fine." As she spoke, she shook her head lightly and left. Ixin was at a loss. After a moment, she suddenly became anxious again. She ran to Melaleuca japonica's side and said, Martial Aunt, can you help me? Go and save him?" Melaleuca japonica looked at Ixin and said, "Who is Lu Qin to you? Why are you so anxious for him?" Ixin was stunned for a moment, then she said perfunctorily, "He's my friend." Martial Aunt, don't ask anymore. Quickly go and save him. Otherwise, something bad will really happen if we're late." Melaleuca japonica snorted and turned around to sit down. She said, "He's just a servant disciple. You want me to offend the Su family for him? How can you do that?" Xian was stunned. For a moment, she couldn't speak. However, at the corner of her eyes, there were a few sparkling tears. Chapter 166. All of you must die. He had even imagined that one day, when his big brother achieved success and fame and achieved the great undertaking of enlightened Yuanying, he would marry Su Qingjun, who was also known as a genius. Even when Gang was at his most glorious and high-spirited, he never dared to imagine that he could develop a relationship with a woman like Su Qingjun. In his mind, only his most respected big brother, he, was worthy of such a fairy-like woman. However, he finally restrained himself because he still had a heavy responsibility. He still hadn't completed the task his big brother entrusted to him, so he couldn't delay his big brother's important matter. Moreover, he wasn't completely muddle-headed. He knew that if he acted impulsively and foolishly at this moment, in front of everyone in Kunwa City, not only would he have nowhere to escape, he would also implicate his big brother. Ixin was extremely anxious. She suddenly ran into the distance, probably to ask for reinforcements. Gang stared at the woman's back for a while and suddenly hesitated. But very quickly, he discovered that his hatred for Lu Qin had unexpectedly surpassed that of Ixin. He finally had an answer to the matter that he couldn't understand no matter how hard he thought. When he saw how close Ixin and Lu Qin were, a raging fire burned in his heart, burning his heart and organs. Even his eyes turned red. It was at this time that he suddenly saw a familiar figure on the bustling street. It was Ixin. When the time came, he would definitely treat this sister-in-law with special respect. He would sincerely instruct his big brother and sister-in-law to achieve supreme glory and become great figures whose names could shake the world. Could it be that they already had a secret affair since they were in the land of chaos? A talented man and a beautiful woman, who wouldn't be envious of them? He had no love for Ixin now, only bone-deep hatred. I can't harm my big brother. This was the greatest strength Gang could muster to suppress all the violent emotions in his heart. He fiercely glared at the young girl who seemed to have a lot on her mind, and was about to leave. Gang wasn't an idiot with a one-track mind, so he was naturally grateful. Without this big brother's care, he felt that he wouldn't be able to walk in front of people. He was afraid that even if he died and rotted on the side of the road, no one would be willing to look at him again. Big brother's business was his business. It was a big deal. If it was possible, even if there was only a glimmer of hope, Gang did not want to disappoint his elder brother. In other words, he had privately given him a token of the Kunlun party. Intimidated by the prestige of the Kunlun party in this place, Gang was able to get some information from those big shops and had a few suspected useful clues. However, after he and Yi secretly investigated and verified these things, they all proved to be useless. Unfortunately, this matter still didn't have a good ending. On this day, when he came out of that big shop empty-handed, his mood was still somewhat gloomy. Just before he went to the land of chaos, he was still a person with a bright future ahead of him. He was a young talent that many people in the Kunlun party thought highly of. Not to mention, he still had a big brother whom many elders in the sect thought highly of and even had hopes of becoming a Yuanian immortal in the future. All of a sudden, Gang felt as if he was suddenly enlightened. It was as if ice and snow had been poured on his head. His entire body suddenly felt cold from head to toe. In that instant, he seemed to understand everything. He stared fixedly at the man beside Xianxia, his mind churning. Then, he finally remembered that he seemed to have seen this person before in the land of chaos. In the midst of all this, he accidentally bumped into a silent fat man standing in the crowd. However, both he and the fat man seemed to be absent-minded and didn't pay attention to it. Therefore, when Gang squeezed his way forward, he didn't notice that the fat man in the crowd had a very deep look of worry in his eyes. He was staring fixedly at Lu Chen, who had been captured by the Su family. However, everything, all the things that he had dreamed of, seemed to suddenly shatter before his eyes. At that moment, Gang felt his mind go blank, but it also felt like the raging waves of the sea, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. He felt as if he had faintly thought of something extremely important, but he just couldn't grasp it. What did this mean? However, according to the two useless young masters of the Su family, it seemed that Su Qingjun really did beat up her own brothers for this man. Could it be that the fairy-like, perfect woman actually had an affair with this man? Sure enough, that Lu Chen wasn't a good person. If it wasn't for him leading the way, without his guidance, who would go to the dangerous Black Armor Mountain? Who would encounter such a terrifying pack of black jackals? He stood in the crowd and secretly watched the development of the matter. Then, he quickly figured out the gist of what had happened. It was that guide. It was that damn guide who led them to the Black Armor Mountain to find the Dusk Fog Flower, but in the end caused them to be besieged by the terrifying pack of black jackals. However, everything was shattered after that trip to the land of chaos, after that nightmarish journey to the Black Armor Mountain. However, at this moment, suddenly, a man walked out from the crowd on the long street and greeted Xianxia. This immediately attracted Gang's attention. Following that, the seemingly close relationship between him and Xianxia also made Gang's heart burn. Gang was such a person. For a moment, Gang's heart surged with an impulse to rush over and grab that woman. He wanted to stab her several times, cut her face, and then interrogate her while dripping with blood. Why did she do this to me? It's him, everything is because of him. Such a voice was like the howling of an evil spirit roaring in Gang's ears, occupying all his thoughts. At this moment, he simply wouldn't think about the other facts that he had deliberately ignored. The moment he saw Xianxia, Gang's body suddenly trembled. At that moment, it was hard to describe his feelings. In fact, looking back on the past, he really couldn't say how deeply he loved this woman. However, later on, this seemingly innocent girl suddenly used such a cruel and tragic method to bite back at him, directly sending him into the 18 levels of hell. This was something that he had never expected at all. Brother Lu? She actually called his name so intimately, as if they had reached a certain level of intimacy. However, looking at this man, he looked so ordinary where, for example, Xianxia wouldn't have known Lu Chen at all. For example, Xianxia had also been seriously injured when she returned from the land of chaos. For example, from the beginning to the end, he had been the one to pester Xianxia. In his heart, perhaps Xianxia should compensate him for the harm he had suffered. He hid in the shadows by the roadside and looked at Lu Chen and Xianxia with eyes that were about to spit fire. He watched as they chatted intimately, as well as those intentional and unintentional intimate gestures. This slut, how dare you betray my big brother? All of you are evil, the entire world is evil. He roared angrily in his heart. Then, he watched as the Su family arrogantly humiliated Lu Chen and took him away. When did these two adulterous men and women hook up? How could a woman like Su Qingjun have any relationship with this ant-like man named Lu Chen? He didn't mind this too much and didn't say anything to He Gang. However, He Gang took it to heart and always felt that he had let his big brother down. It must have something to do with this man. They must have had an affair, so this adulterous man and woman deliberately harmed us. Therefore, although he hadn't made any progress in tracking down the cinnabar in the shops in Kunwa City, he also told him that if there was no hope in this matter, he should put it off for now. There was no harm in thinking of other methods while he was on Mount Kunlun. However, He Gang still held on to a sliver of hope and secretly continued to inquire and investigate. It couldn't be said that love turned into hate. He Gang's pupils suddenly shrank as if he had been struck by lightning. For the bustling Kunwa City, this day was probably just an ordinary day, but for many people, it was perhaps even more lively than usual. However, this matter was still very difficult to deal with. First, there were too many shops in the city and cinnabar wasn't considered a particularly precious spiritual material, so many shops sold it. Second, he was investigating the identity of the buyer, which was actually quite embarrassing. Shops with small buyers wouldn't pay attention to it at all, but shops with big buyers would keep a close eye on it and wouldn't easily reveal it. During this period of time, for the sake of the task his big brother, he had been secretly wandering among the shops of various sizes in Kunwa City to inquire about the spiritual material cinnabar. At that moment, He Gang wished he could tear Lu Chen into 1,000 pieces. Staring at the two people, He Gang was burning with rage. He let out a silent roar and was about to pounce on these adulterous men and women. But right at this moment, a group of people suddenly rushed out from the other side and surrounded Lu Chen and Exin. This bastard named Lu Chen unexpectedly had a relationship with Su Qingjun, who was famous in the Kunlun party and was almost synonymous with perfection and fairy. That aloof fairy-like woman. In the crowd, He Gang clenched his fists and couldn't help gasping for breath. He felt as if the blood in his whole body was about to boil. At this moment, he even hated Su Qingjun to the bone. He resolutely followed the group of people from the Su family. Along the way, he watched Lu Chen being pushed and beaten. The pleasure in his heart couldn't be any greater. When he was about to reach the gate of the Su residence, because there were already a lot of onlookers around, he had no choice but to desperately squeeze his way in. That day, among the 3 people on the Black Armor Mountain, Xianxia's cultivation was the lowest and she had the least experience. But why did Martial Uncle Han die tragically, and he was seriously injured and disfigured, but this woman was safe and sound? He even offended all the young masters of the Su family in Kunwa City and even caused them to be beaten up. But very soon, He Gang found another thing that made him even more jealous. So much so that when he saw those people from the Su family pushing and beating Lu Chen, a trace of cold and ruthless killing intent flashed across the depths of his eyes. In pain, people were always willing to believe what they liked, regardless of whether it was right or wrong. Until today, he became like this, neither a human nor a ghost. Not only did he implicate his big brother, he was also punished, and he was even driven out of the Kunlun party. In such a miserable situation, the source of everything was instantly transferred to this hateful man. He Gang, who had originally taken a step forward, suddenly stopped. The two brothers had a good relationship since childhood. He was a bit older than He Gang, but his talent, and luck were far better than his, so it was always He who took care of him. Even after the incident with the Xian, even though he suffered a lot of criticism and pressure, he didn't give up on his younger brother. Chapter 167. This fatty was, of course, Old Ma. Old Ma stood in the crowd, looking with worry at Lu Chen, who had been captured by the Su family. He was originally a secret agent, so he was very well informed. The time it took for the Su family to clash with Lu Chen on the street, and the time it took for him to be escorted to the gates of the Su residence was enough for him to know what had happened. Old Ma rushed over and saw the scene of pushing and shoving in front of the gates of the Su residence. His face was as gloomy as water, His pupils slightly contracted. Someone pushed forward and bumped into him, but he did not even react, his gaze only fixed on Lu Chen. Then, when Lu Chen was escorted to the gates of the Su residence by the crowd, the servants and guards in the gatehouse rushed out to speak with Su Qian, Su Wen and the others. He temporarily stopped and turned his head to look. In the blink of an eye, they saw each other. Their gazes met in the air. Old Ma's lips moved slightly. After taking a deep breath, he took a step forward. But at this time, Lu Chen suddenly shook his head lightly. Old Ma immediately stopped, standing stiffly in place like a pillar, even if his eyes flashed with a layer of indescribable pain and anger. His hands were hidden in his wide sleeves, clenched into fists, his fingernails digging into his flesh, leaving deep white marks. His gaze was silent, but it seemed to say something. Two silent men, standing in the crowd, seemed to be a lonely shadow outside of this world. At this point in life, it was like a trace of mud flitting across the years, or like someone's meaningless and distant sigh. So, there were actually so many more important things. Old Ma raised his head, looking at the sky. It was daytime, the sky bright and clear. In this beautiful world, in this bright day, how could there be a shadow? He gritted his teeth, but smiled and then slowly lowered his head. Lu Chen was escorted into the Su residence. Without a doubt, this was the first time Lu Chen had come to the Su family's mansion in Kunwa City. This was the place where the Su clan resided in Kunwa City, and it was also their most fundamental foundation. Over the years, many extraordinary people had come out of this mansion, and they had allowed the Su family to prosper for many years. Even today, the Su family had not declined, and in the foreseeable future, it seemed that the Su family would continue to prosper. This was because another talented genius had appeared here. She was like a perfect fairy who lived on the Flying Goose Terrace. The Su residence was, of course, very large, and at the same time very luxurious. Moreover, because it had flourished for many years, it had a deep heritage and accumulation, so there was also an extremely deep aura of nobility here. The paintings on the veranda, the exquisite carvings of birds and beasts on the eaves, the seemingly ordinary but actually incomparably precious flowers and trees, all of them showed that this place was different from the rest, showing that the Su family was a truly famous and influential clan. However, compared to the heavy accumulation in the surroundings, Su Qian, Su Wen, and the others who were escorting Lu Chen seemed somewhat out of place. Each and every one of them was in high spirits, arrogant and domineering. The servants who passed by on the road retreated one after another, and those who didn't have time to greet them hurriedly. Su Qian and Su Wen naturally didn't have the time to talk nonsense with these servants. At most, when they saw a few pretty young maidservants, they would laugh heartily and hug them to take advantage of them. They would touch here and there and pat their buttocks, causing those maidservants to turn pale and scatter in all directions like startled birds. Then, they would laugh at their backs and shout, "You, come to my room tonight, I, your young master, have taken a fancy to you." The attendants at the side all laughed heartily. Each and every one of them seemed to be very excited. The only person in the crowd who didn't laugh was probably Lu Chen. None of the surrounding people of the Su residence stood out to speak. After all, Su Qian, Su Wen, and that young master Sumo who was still recuperating were known as the three heroes of the Su family. They were the most favored of the younger generation of the Su family. In particular, Sumo was the flesh and blood of the current madam of the household. She was normally the most spoiled, and she was also the younger brother of Su Qingjun, who was currently at the peak of her power. It could be said that no one dared to provoke her. When Lord Su and young lady Su Qingjun were here, perhaps they could still manage these young masters. But now that young lady Qingjun was living on the Kunlun Mountains, no one dared to meddle in the matters that Lord Su could not manage. Otherwise, they would be punished. Normally, there would have been people coming over to reprimand them, but today, it seemed that no one was willing to stand up for them. Su Qian and Su Wen were also fearless. They walked all the way to a courtyard on the west side of the Su residence. Before they entered, Su Wen already shouted, Brother, are you there? Quickly come and see who I've caught for you. Today, I'll let you vent your anger, ha." Everyone laughed heartily and walked in together. Lu Chen looked around the courtyard and saw that there was an extremely luxurious two-story building at the front. There was a pond of flowers and plants at the side. The flowers that bloomed were all magnificent and filled with a luxurious atmosphere. It was even more luxurious than the Su residence he saw from the outside. But that kind of dignified atmosphere was nowhere to be found here. In front of the small building, there was a large reclining chair. A man was lying on it. His appearance was somewhat similar to Su Qian and Su Wen. It was Sumo. At this moment, he sat up and looked over with a surprised expression. Then, Su Qian and Su Wen walked over and said a few words to him. Sumo immediately revealed a happy expression. Then, he looked in Lu Chen's direction with a somewhat disgusted and ruthless expression. Lu Chen also looked at Sumo. As the most unlucky of the three brothers of the Su family that day on the Flying Goose platform, Su Qingjuan's attack on him. Oh, actually, it was his foot that was the heaviest. It was said that this fellow broke several bones and couldn't get up for half a month. Looking at his current appearance, it seemed that he really hadn't fully recovered. Once a woman flipped out, it was still very scary. In Lu Chen's mind flashed the image of Su Qingjuan's valiant and heroic posture after flipping the table on the Flying Goose platform. He couldn't help but laugh in his heart. But on the surface, he still quickly lowered his head and didn't look at the people around him, appearing somewhat timid. Just now at the Su residence's front door, he saw Old Ma. With their many years of working together and friendship, even if it was just a silent glance, they were able to exchange a lot of information and thoughts. He saw Old Ma's worry, but in the end he still stopped him. The evil sect spy hiding in the Kunlun Mountains had still not been found. No matter what, it was not the time for him to expose his identity. Since he had to compromise, since he was determined to endure it, then there was no point in continuing to resist. Bring him over. Sumo, who was sitting on the rattan chair, shouted loudly. The attendants beside her immediately surrounded Lu Chen and pushed him to the stone steps in front of the small building. Su Qian and Su Wen stood beside Sumo. Sumo looked very excited. She stared at Lu Chen and said with a hideous smile, "Brat, do you still recognize me?" "Yes, you are Master Su." Lu Chen replied honestly. Sumo laughed and said, "You didn't expect this day would come, right?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "Master Su, if I say that what happened that day was a misunderstanding and it really has nothing to do with me, will you believe me?" "Hey!" The three brothers of the Su family on the steps spat in unison, their faces showing disdain. Sumo said fiercely, "Do you think we are fools?" Su Wen stood at the side and sneered. "In the past, Sister June was so good to us and would grant all our requests. But after you came to the Flying Goose platform, so many things happened. What not seeing us, what scolding us for waiting, and finally even beating us. Who else can we blame but you?" Sumo snorted and said, "Why are you talking so much nonsense with this guy? Damn it. I've been beaten up for no reason, and I've long been stifled in my heart. Today, I must vent my anger." After saying that, he suddenly raised his voice and roared, "Someone, bring my treasures here." Someone at the side had already answered. Then, two people went and walked into the small building, laughing and joking. After a while, they came out with a few big boxes and placed them in front of the three brothers of the Su family. Then, they opened them one by one. Everyone present, including the Su family brothers and the servants, laughed coldly. Their laughter was bone-chilling, like wild beasts that were about to devour people. "Kid, do you want to pick one for yourself?" Sumo clicked her tongue and narrowed her eyes. Like a cat, she looked at the mouse that she had caught with a tyrannical gaze. She grinned and said, "Don't worry, I won't let you die so easily." Lu Chen looked down and saw that the boxes were neatly arranged, and they were all strangely shaped instruments of torture. At this moment, those incomparably sharp blades, those hair-raising spikes, and all kinds of indescribable and terrifying torture tools were all emitting a cold radiance under the sunlight that fell from the sky. For the first time, Lu Chen's face became gloomy. Then, he raised his head and quietly glanced at the three arrogant and domineering Su family brothers standing on the steps. His eyes were cold. Outside the Su family's gate, the crowd of onlookers had yet to disperse. There would never be a lack of busybodies. It was in many people's nature to watch the fun. He Gang stood in the crowd. He was a little anxious, a little excited, and a little regretful that he couldn't go in and see Lu Qin being punished. However, the words that came from the crowd around him from time to time still made him obtain great satisfaction. The rumor that the three brothers of the Su family liked to use torture to punish their servants and make them beg for death, although there was no evidence, it was vividly described as if it was true. In the crowd, He Gang was happy. On the other side, Old Ma's face was slightly trembling and twisted. He was forcibly suppressing the anger and anxiety in his heart. It was at this time that they suddenly raised their heads at the same time and looked towards the sky. A bright ray of light, like a shocking rainbow, flew over. The sharp whistling sound of breaking through the air was deafening. It could be seen how fast it was. In just a moment, this rainbow light directly landed in front of the Su family's gate. Some cultivators in the crowd with better eyesight had already cried out in surprise, "This is a golden core cultivator." Chapter 168. When the light dissipated, a beautiful woman appeared in front of the gates of the Su residence. This immediately caused a commotion in the surrounding crowd, as well as the group of servants and guards of the Su residence. All of a sudden, the crowd gathered around him and greeted him one after another. However, behind the crowd, there was a manservant whose expression suddenly changed. After looking left and right, he took advantage of the crowd's inattention to sneak away and ran into the depths of the Su residence. Old Li, who was standing at the front of the crowd, was the first to call out, "Young miss, why are you back?" This person was naturally Su Qingjun. At this moment, she was dressed no different from usual, with a scarlet feather cape and a long sword on her back. But her expression did not look good. After looking at the surrounding people, she nodded to Old Li, who was standing at the front of the crowd, and called out, "Uncle Li." Old Li had been in the Su family for many years, and it could be said that he had watched this generation of youngsters grow up. In the past, when Su Qingjun was still at home, she would respectfully call him Uncle Li when they met. But at this moment, when Old Li saw Su Qingjun's expression, his heart skipped a beat. In the past, although Su Qingjun was indifferent in front of others, she had always been well-mannered and polite to servants and her other brothers and sisters. But today, although there seemed to be no change on the surface, there seemed to be a faint anger in her. Standing on the stone steps of the main entrance, Su Qingjun looked back and saw that the street in front of the Su residence was surrounded by many people, all of them stretching their necks to look in this direction. Her expression slightly sank, and she asked Old Li, "What's going on?" Old Li did not know what to say for a moment, but when Su Qingjun looked at him and slightly furrowed her brows, that natural majesty and reverence towards the legendary Jin Dan friar made him quickly make a decision. No matter how arrogant the three young masters of the Su family were, how could they be compared to the genius girl in front of him? As a result, Old Li obediently recounted what he had just seen. At the end, he pointed at the crowd in front of him and said, "Young masters Su Qian and Su Wen captured the people and brought them into the manor. Those people were the ones who had come to watch along the way and have been waiting here for a long time." A trace of anger flashed across Su Qingjun's face, and she asked in a low voice, "What does that person look like?" Old Li thought for a moment, then described the appearance of the man who had been captured by Su Qian and Su Wen. A few of the servants beside him also added a few sentences to the story. For the servants of this kind of rich and powerful family, observing one's expression was the most basic skill. The few people here only watched for a while, and they could faintly see that this young miss of their family was very dissatisfied with the actions of the few young masters. Anyway, no matter who made the choice, the Su family would definitely rely on this young miss in the future, so there was nothing to hide. The serious thing was, if they did not say anything now, and someone had the intention to complain in the future, then it would be terrible. After listening to Old Li and the others describe the appearance of the person who had been captured, Su Qingjun quickly determined that it was most likely Lu Qin. As for why Su Qian and Su Wen would suddenly find trouble with Lu Qin, Su Qingjun also had an idea in her heart, but it was also because of this that she became even more angry and a little worried. So after listening to Old Lee's words, she quickly nodded her head and then walked into the Su residence with a cold face. Naturally, no one dared to stop her, and in an instant, a path opened up. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a servant girl suddenly ran out of the Su residence. She had a pretty appearance and looked to be around 14 or 15 years old. Her expression was a little anxious, and when she saw Su Qingjun walk in, she hurriedly ran over with large strides. She first bowed to Su Qingjun, then hurriedly said in a loud voice, "Young miss, Madam heard that you've returned and is very happy. She wants you to meet her in the front hall." Su Qingjun's footsteps stopped, and a trace of surprise appeared on her face. "Mother wants me to go over?" The servant girl nodded repeatedly and said with a smile, "Yes, Madam said that she hasn't seen you in a long time. It's rare for young miss to return today, so she wants to see you immediately." A trace of hesitation flashed across Su Qingjun's face. Since she was young, she had been taught to be an educated and reasonable person, to be filial to her parents, and to be friendly to her younger siblings. These should have been things that were right and proper. Moreover, after she entered the Kunlun party, she lived on the mountain for a long time, and the number of times she returned home had decreased, and she rarely had the opportunity to be in front of her parents. Thinking of this, she glanced in the direction of the west side of the Su residence. She still understood the few younger brothers and cousins in the family. Although they were usually a little naughty and mischievous, they were respectful in front of her. She also didn't hear that they had done anything too vile. After a while, there shouldn't be any big problems, right? After thinking for a while, she nodded her head and said to the servant girl, "Okay, then I'll go over." The front hall of the Su residence was behind the courtyard, and looking from afar, it was a spacious, square, and grand house. At this moment, the doors and windows were open, and several servant girls walked in and out. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, it's actually not as exaggerated as you say." Madame Bai patted her hand and gently said, "I know. Anyway, you can be considered to have some achievements in cultivation. I'm also a little more relieved. But you still have to take care of yourself, understand?" "And I understand. Also, when you are on the Kunlun mountain, when you have time, take care of your younger brother Sumo. As for the rest of the family, you can do as you see fit. Mo is your biological younger brother. His talent is not as high as yours. It's also my fault. When I was giving birth to him, I met with something that didn't go my way. Anger attacked my heart and caused me to have a difficult birth, causing his innate vitality to be damaged." Su Qingjun softly said, "Mother, don't worry. I will naturally take good care of my younger brothers at home." Madame Bai looked at her, and her face slightly darkened. She said, "That's right. A few days ago, when Mo came back from the mountain, he was seriously injured. He couldn't get out of bed for 10 days to half a month. I originally wanted to investigate this matter. In the end, after carefully interrogating Su Qian and Su Wen, they said that it was you who injured Mo. I scolded them at that time, saying how could that be possible? You are Mo's biological sister, how could this be?" Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. She looked at Madame Bai's face and said in a low voice, "Mother, that matter was indeed done by me." Madame Bai tightened her grip on Jun Linyuan's hand. She didn't speak for a while. She just stared at Jun Linyuan and frowned. "Jun, I know your temperament. You are usually the most sensible person in the world. You also love your younger siblings very much. What happened? Why did you have to be so heavy-handed? Why did you have to teach your half-brother a lesson?" Su Qingjuan's face showed a slight struggle. After hesitating for a while, she shook her head and said, "Mother, when my younger brother was on the mountain that day, he did indeed do something wrong." Madame Bai's face darkened. She said, "What on earth did he do wrong? Tell me." Su Qingjun had no choice but to tell her what happened on the Flying Goose platform that day. After listening to her, a trace of displeasure flashed across Madame Bai's face. She said lightly, "Just for an irrelevant person, you broke your younger brother's bones. Isn't this a bit too much?" When Su Qingjun wanted to explain more, suddenly, from outside the hall, from somewhere far away in the mansion of the Su mansion, came a sudden burst of noise and shouting. Among them, there were people laughing loudly, and there were also people shouting in pain. Su Qingjun suddenly stood up and looked out of the room. Her face instantly darkened. Chapter 169. I'm going out for a walk. Su Qingjun turned around and said to Madame Bai. She was about to walk out, but she heard Madame Bai suddenly call her and said, June, come and sit down. I have something to tell you. Su Qingjun's body froze in place. After a moment of hesitation, she frowned slightly and said to Madame Bai in a soft voice, Mother, I have something urgent to deal with now. Can I come and talk to you after I'm done? Madame Bai stared at her, and her face gradually darkened. She said lightly, Why? In your opinion, is there anything more important than your parents in this world? Su Qingjun was stunned and speechless. She turned around to look at Madame Bai and said, Mother, how can you have such a thought? I've never disrespected you. Madame Bai looked at her for a while and suddenly sighed. She said, My good daughter, of course I believe you. Come here. She waved at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was a little hesitant, but then she slowly walked over. Madame Bai stood up and gently held her in her arms. There was a trace of love on her face. She murmured, In this world, how can there be parents who don't love their children? June, I'm really thinking about you. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. She said, Mother, I still don't quite understand what you mean. Madame Bai shook her head and said, You're in a hurry to go out now. Do you want to go to your brother's place? Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head and looked at Madame Bai. She looked surprised and blurted out, Mother, how did you know? She paused for a moment, and then her face turned cold. She said, Then you also know what Sumo did? Madame Bai gently waved her hand and said, That child is only a little naughty. It's only because you beat him up so badly last time that he has nowhere to vent his anger. He doesn't dare to cause trouble for you. Isn't he just casually finding an insignificant servant to vent his anger on? What's there to be surprised about? Su Qingjun's eyes showed some surprise and anger. She said in a low voice, That's not right. Madame Bai snorted and said, There are many big and small aristocratic families in Kanwa City. There are many young people there who beat people to vent their anger. Beating and scolding is like a common thing. Don't say it as if you haven't seen it since you were a child. Su Qingjun wanted to say something, but she hesitated. She clenched her teeth and said after a long while, Mother, that's different. He's a Kunlun disciple. He's just a part-time disciple. Madame Bai suddenly raised her voice and said, He has no talent and no background. What's the difference between him and the servants in our family? Su Qingjun slowly clenched her fists inside her sleeves, but her head slightly drooped. Seeing her expression, Madame Bai's heart seemed to soften. She lowered her voice and said softly, June, you're the most outstanding person in our Su family. If he has the ability, he can come to me. I'm the one who hurt him. Why does he want to vent his anger on me? Slap. Suddenly, a crisp sound came from the hall. It was Madame Bai who slapped Su Qingjun hard in the face with a livid face. Su Qingjun covered her cheek with her hand. There was a look of disbelief in her eyes. She looked at Madame Bai in astonishment. It seemed that even her voice was a little shaky. She said, Mother, I'm hitting you to wake you up. Madame Bai said coldly, What? Do you think you're great now that you're Jindan Friar? You can crush me with one finger. That's nothing. Come over and draw your sword and kill me. Su Qingjun took a step back. There was a painful expression on her face. She shook her head and said, Mother, how could I? Madame Bai took a deep breath and calmed down her unusually excited mood. Then she stared at Su Qingjun and said, June, listen to me. Your father and I are not young anymore. How can there be immortality in this world? Our only wish is that you and Mo can help each other for the rest of your life. Because in this world, there's no one who is closer than blood. If you don't believe in your own brother and this blood, who else can you believe in? Looking at Su Qingjun, she raised her voice and yelled with unusual anger, but now, you're going to make things difficult for your brother for an outsider. How can I be at ease after 100 years? Are you trying to anger me to death? She scolded Su Qingjun angrily, as if she was looking at a child who was resentful of iron for not becoming steel. There was even a faint trace of tears in her eyes. Su Qingjun stepped back in a daze. She grew up listening to heaven and earth, her parents, and her teachers. She was taught to be respectful, and she had always done so. For so many years, no one had ever said that she was wrong. No one had ever not praised her for being sensible and polite. Everyone thought that she was the best daughter in the world. But all of this seemed to have suddenly changed today. Are you trying to anger me to death? Her mother's question exploded in her ears like a clap of thunder, causing her to feel dizzy and her mind to go blank. She staggered a few steps back. As if it was instinctive, she subconsciously wanted to walk out. Listen, I won't argue with you about the matter of you hurting him, or a last time, seeing that we are a family. Madame Bai looked at her coldly from behind and said, but if you dare to find trouble with him again, I will kill myself in this hall, in front of you. Su Qingjuan's body shook and her face instantly turned pale. She turned around and looked at Madame Bai, as if she was looking at a stranger. 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks and she said in a trembling voice, Mother, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to do this? Madame Bai's face was ashen as she turned around and no longer looked at her. She said, if you really dare to disobey me, then go and try it yourself. Otherwise, hurry up and leave this place now. Immediately return to Kunlun Mountain. Leave immediately. At the end of her words, her tone was harsh and stern. Su Qingjun looked at her in a daze. Then she slowly walked out of the hall. Under the strange gazes of the servants, she used her hand to wipe away the tears on her face. This way, she could pretend that she was still perfect. She slowly, step by step, walked towards the front. From the depths of the mansion, tyrannical laughter and painful voices still floated over from time to time. There were even more joyful laughter as if she was the accomplice of a villain. But her footsteps still involuntarily walked towards the Su Fu's main gate. Heaven and earth, father and mother. High like a peak, heavy like a mountain. She raised her head and looked at the sky. The azure blue sky seemed to have no end. It was so deep and vast, endless. Her face was pale, as if there was not a trace of blood. Unknowingly, she really did walk in front of the Su Fu's main gate. The group of servants and guards hurriedly came forward. The one leading them was still oldly. Looking at Su Qingjuan's face, he said with some worry, Eldest young miss, are you all right? Su Qingjun did not respond to his words. She only stared blankly at the several stone steps in front of the Su Fu's main gate. She had never thought that these stone steps in her own house would be so difficult to walk. The most difficult thing in the world? Was it the ways of the world? Her face was pale as she stood in front of this huge aristocratic family's main gate. She stood under the Su family's large signboard. The people at the side looked at each other, but for a moment, no one dared to say anything. She did not know how long she stood there. The wind blew past her body, her hair and clothes all slightly fluttered. Gradually, a clear and cold feeling seeped out. Clear as water. Cold as ice and frost. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Oldly. She opened her mouth. Her voice was like the clear ringing of a bell in the wind. There was not the slightest bit of dirt. She quietly asked, Uncle Lee? May I ask if there is a table in your room? Chapter 170. That day was supposed to be a very, very ordinary day in Kunwa City. It was bustling, people coming and going, merchants and goods flourishing. The cultivators were in high spirits, and the ordinary mortals lived in peace and contentment. The big clans in the city were also like this, enjoying the shade under their own big trees, peacefully and leisurely passing every good time. How many years had it been? Hadn't it always been like this? No one had ever thought of changing and no one was willing to change. The Su family, a big clan in Kunwa City, was also like this. Until that quiet afternoon, when an exceptionally mournful and soul-shaking sharp whistle suddenly appeared in this deep courtyard, as if it had pierced through the heaven and earth and shattered all the tranquility, tearing everything to shreds. Boom! It was a deafening sound. Like a thunderbolt on a clear day, like a thunderstorm, it exploded in this big residence, causing everyone to turn their heads in astonishment, causing the hall to shake, and causing the ground to tremble. Like a tiger's roar breaking through the mountain forest, it swept across the clear sky like an invisible but incomparably swift and violent wave, wildly and ferociously surging in all directions. A table flew into the air. It was a square black wooden table, plain and simple, without too many exquisite and flashy carvings, only deep and heavy. It flew up. A table flew up. The table didn't have any intelligence. If it did, it certainly wouldn't have thought that in its ordinary life, it would unexpectedly have such a brilliant and world-shaking fortuitous encounter. It flew into the air, emitting a deafening sharp whistle, then broke through the sky and flew away. Wherever the flying table passed, it was invincible and unstoppable. People were thrown off their feet, horses were thrown off their feet, trees were toppled over, and walls were split open. Like a fierce tiger descending the mountain, like a divine dragon entering the sea, wild and unruly, with a violent determination, it advanced courageously. Amidst the rumbling sound, dust flew everywhere, and the entire Sioux residence was in chaos. Screams and cries instantly rang out everywhere. Everyone was overwhelmed with shock, not knowing what had happened. Only that table, alone and proud, flew over the crowd, passed over the gazes, knocked down the trees, and broke through the high walls. It was a flying table. It rushed into the sky and arrived with a rumbling sound. As a result, the sand and stones scattered and heaven and earth resonated with each other. A huge cloud of dust seemed to have condensed into an earth dragon, rumbling from afar. It was like a hot knife through butter. From the depths of the pavilions and courtyards, it forcibly broke open a path to that small courtyard. Finally, in a deafening noise, a large hole was first smashed open in Sumo's courtyard. Then cracks appeared everywhere, and strange noises were heard. A moment later, in a rumbling noise, an entire wall collapsed with a loud rumble. Dust flew up into the air. Everyone was dumbstruck. They turned their heads to look in that direction, and in the depths of the dust cloud, a faint breeze blew over. A figure slowly walked out from the thick dust cloud. With a long sword on his back, his expression was cold. Like a lonely and proud woman in the world, she stepped through the dust and walked into this place. The air reeked of blood. Su Qingjuan's gaze passed through the shocked crowd and saw Lu Chen lying on the ground. That man seemed to have lost a lot of blood. There seemed to be many wounds on his body. Those wounds looked very deep and heavy. In some places, not only blood and flesh could be seen, but even white bones could be seen. It was a horrible sight, and it made one's hair stand. But for some reason, even with such heavy injuries, the man did not faint. He seemed to still be very conscious. Even if this was an unbearable pain for ordinary people, he would rather endure it than lose his consciousness. Or perhaps he was already used to this kind of pain. When he turned his head to look in the pool of blood, his gaze met with Su Qingjuan's in the air. He looked at her walking over. He was lying in a pool of blood. There did not seem to be much pain on his face at that moment. He was even in the blood. Facing her, he smiled slightly. That bloody smile was shocking and soul-stirring. It was like a sharp sword piercing into her chest, like a raging fire burning her soul. Su Qingjun held her breath. Her body trembled slightly. She clenched her teeth tightly. Just when she wanted to control herself again, she saw that beside the man lying on the ground, there were those terrifying and twisted instruments of torture scattered all over the ground. Those sharp, twisted and bloody blades. It was as if a sudden clap of thunder had suddenly exploded above her head. It was as if a demonic beast lying dormant in the depths of her heart was roaring. That surge of hot blood rushed to her heart, causing her heart to go blank for a moment. She opened her mouth slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But for some reason, not a single word came out. She could only stare blankly at the man lying in a pool of blood. She clenched her teeth, and a few tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes. Then, like a young child, she used the back of her hand to wipe away the sparkling and dazzling tears on her cheeks. "Hey, Sister June, why have you come?" A voice called out from the front. It was Sumo, who was sitting on the chair in front of the small building. She straightened her body and smiled at Su Qingjun. "Why did you make such a big scene?" "Sister, you are going to tear down our house." "But it doesn't matter. Our house doesn't have anything else but money. You can tear it down however you want. At most, we can just rebuild it again in the future." Su Qingjun glanced at Sumo. Without saying a word, she stepped forward and walked towards Lu Chen. The smile on Sumo's face froze. She looked at Su Qian and Su Wen, who were standing beside her. Su Qian coughed and gave a look to the attendants standing below. After a while, someone came over to greet Su Qingjun. He forced a smile and said, "Eldest miss, look, this is the person that young Master Mo wants." His voice hadn't even finished resounding in the air when a shrill cry suddenly resounded from his mouth. His entire body suddenly rose from the ground. Su Qingjun had stretched out her hand, grabbed his shirt, and then tossed him away like a rock. The dumbfounded crowd watched as the man in midair drew an arc across half of the courtyard. Then, with a bang, he slammed heavily into the wall that was still standing on the opposite side. In an instant, a clear human imprint was left on the wall. Then, with blood flowing from his mouth and nose, he fell to the ground motionlessly. It seemed that he had fainted. In the small courtyard, there was a sudden silence. After a while, there was suddenly an angry and irritable voice. It was Sumo. She shouted from the front, "What are you doing? Are you trying to show off to me? Don't forget that we are brother and sister." "Brother and sister. Because of an outsider, you caused me to be like this. Is it not enough you still want to beat me? Come, if you have the guts, then beat me to death. Beat me to death." He roared furiously, like an irritable beast. Su Qingjun looked coldly at him in front of the small building. Her eyes were as cold as snow. She suddenly raised her hand. In this chaotic small courtyard, a clear dragon roar was heard. It was like a ray of autumn water shining into the dust, like a pool of clear water washing the world. A ray of sword light lit up, illuminating her peerless face and reflecting in her clear and bright eyes, emitting a dazzling radiance. The long sword on her back flew out of its sheath. The sword shadows filled the sky. A strange scene appeared. Under the clear sky, a full moon suddenly appeared in the sky. Cold and lonely, unattainable. The moonlight, like water, fell into the world, illuminating the sword light. The sword blade reflected the moonlight. The moonlight turned into silence. All living things in the world held their breath. Only that light, from the endless vault of heaven, faintly slashed down. It was the moonlight slash. That moment of brilliance seemed to snatch all the years of the world. It was silent. It was like the passing of countless stars, the rising of the sun and setting of the moon. Someone sighed on the other side. The sword light fell, brilliant, stagnated and disappeared. Like the wind and smoke passing by, it disappeared without a trace. Everyone was at a loss. The three Su family brothers in front of the small building were also stunned speechless. They looked at each other and made sure that they were all right. Sumo then heaved a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to speak, suddenly a cracking sound was heard from behind. The three of them turned back in shock. On that incomparably luxurious small building, countless cracks suddenly appeared. Cruelly and coldly smashed all the beautiful splendor, tore all the brick walls and eaves. After a while, suddenly a loud sound was heard. The entire building collapsed. In the flying dust, everyone screamed in fear. The three Su family brothers stumbled, ran and crawled with all their might, shouting. The people around them were also panicking and rushed up to rescue them. The small courtyard immediately became a mess. In the midst of the chaos, the ancient longsword had already quietly returned to its sheath. Su Qingjun no longer paid attention to the chaos. Through the dust, she walked to Lu Chen's side. Just like at the flying goose platform, she gently squatted down beside him. She looked at his eyes, at the blood that flowed from his body, and at the little smile on his face that should not have been there, but still showed. She suddenly felt that the sword just now, that little bit of sharpness, seemed to have cut her heart. She had thousands of words she wanted to say, but in the end, after her lips slightly trembled a few times, she still only said softly, "Does it hurt?" "It hurts." Lu Chen nodded and smiled. Su Qingjun lowered her head. A teardrop fell into the dust on the ground, wetting a bit of the ground. "You're so old, why are you crying?" Lu Chen said to her. "And it's not your fault. I'm fine, I won't die." Su Qingjun wanted to laugh, but for some reason, more tears flowed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then forced a smile and said, "Why are you pretending to be strong again? When I was outside, I heard your cry." Lu Chen said, "I didn't want to scream at first, but then I saw a golden light in the sky. I thought that in the Su family, probably only you, Jean Dan Friar, would come. So I shouted to see if you would come to save me." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "You're so smart." Lu Chen said, "Isn't that so?" Su Qingjun stared at him for a long time, then stretched out her hands, hugged his body, and then softly said in a voice that only Lu Chen could hear, "I'm sorry, I'm late." "It's okay," Lu Chen said. Chapter 171. Warm blood flowed down from his body and quickly dyed her clothes. Her beautiful and clean clothes also seemed to be dyed with a layer of strange blood. However, Su Qingjun did not care about this. She was more concerned that when she wanted to pick up Lu Chen's body, she discovered that there were even deeper and more cruel wounds on his body. She stared blankly for a while and found that it was difficult to make Lu Chen stand on his own. She could only gently put him down. Then, looking at the bloody mess on his body, she said in a low voice, "Wait for me." Then she stood up and looked around. She walked towards the small courtyard where many attendants, including the 3 Su family brothers, were standing together. The power of the moonlight slash just now was too strong. It had already frightened everyone here, including Sumo, who had not yet recovered. When they saw Su Qingjun walk over, everyone immediately took a few steps back with a look of fear on their faces. Su Qingjun's face was as cold as frost. She pointed at one of the attendants who looked a bit cleaner and said, "Take off your outer clothes." That attendant was stunned for a moment and said in surprise, "What?" Su Qingjun did not say it a second time. She only looked at him coldly. That attendant's legs instantly went soft. He repeatedly said, "Good, good, good." As he said this, he hurriedly took off his outer clothes. He was afraid that if he was a bit slower, his hands and feet would also leave his body like the clothes. Su Qingjun grabbed the outer clothes and walked back to Lu Chen's side. Then she carefully wrapped his body with the clothes, not letting those bloody wounds be exposed in the dust. Lu Chen smiled and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble." Su Qingjun looked at him and said in a low voice, "Why didn't you die from the pain?" Lu Chen laughed loudly. But after laughing a few times, his voice twisted like the muscles on his face. He sucked in a breath of cold air. It seemed that he had touched a wound somewhere. Su Qingjun shook her head. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. She used all her strength to help him up. At the same time, she put one of Lu Chen's arms on her shoulder so that most of his body was leaning on her body. Then she was about to leave. In the eyes of the other people in the small courtyard, this kind of action was like they had seen a ghost. Especially the 3 Su family brothers, their faces were full of shock. Sumo was the first to jump out. But it seemed that her injuries had not healed very well. She tripped and almost fell. Fortunately, she was supported by Su Qian and Su Wen. He barely managed to stand and shouted at Su Qingjun, "Sister, what are you doing? Do you have an affair with this person?" Su Qingjun looked at him coldly and said, "Shut your stinky mouth." Sumo was furious and shouted, "I am your brother from the same father and mother. Why can't I tell you about your affairs?" Su Qingjun stared at Su Mo coldly and said, "If it weren't for the fact that you're my close relative, I would have cut you down with my sword just now based on the heartless evil you've done today." Get lost. You are not allowed to meddle in my affairs in the future. After being glared at by her ice-cold gaze, Su Imo recalled the lonely yet terrifying sword light just now. For a moment, he couldn't muster up the courage to refute her. However, at this moment, an angry voice suddenly came from outside the door, saying, "How dare you? He, as your brother, can't meddle in your affairs. Then what about me, as your mother? Do I have the right to meddle in your affairs?" All the people present were moved and turned to look. Sure enough, they saw a well-maintained woman walking in from the door of the small courtyard. It was Madame Bai, the current madam of the Su family. For a moment, many attendants and servants greeted her. The three brothers of the Su family went to greet her. Sumo even limped to Madame Bai and shouted with a little sob, "Mother!" Madame Bai patted him gently on the shoulder, her expression overflowing with affection. She then turned to look at the wretched state of the collapsed trees and collapsed walls. Her brows immediately furrowed, and when she looked at Su Qingjun again, her expression was incomparably gloomy. "Jun, don't you have any respect for me?" Under Madame Bai's threatening gaze, Su Qingjun dodged a little at first. But soon she seemed to have the courage to look straight into her mother's eyes and said, "Mother, I have said that it was my brother's fault today." Madame Bai said angrily, "What did he do wrong? Even if he did something wrong, it's not worth it for you to make such a big fuss. Do you want to tear down our house?" Su Qingjun sneered. She pointed at the frightening torture tools and blades scattered on the ground and said coldly, "Do you see these things? Do you think he made a small mistake when he used these disgusting things to harm people?" She suddenly raised her voice and said loudly, "This is only in our house. If it were in Kunlun Mountain, under the strict rules, what would be waiting for him?" Madame Bai glanced at the torture tools. Suddenly her face turned pale. Obviously, she was shocked and even a little frightened. Then, as if she thought of something, she glared at Sumo fiercely. Sumo looked as if he had shrunk into a ball. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. Madame Bai gritted her teeth and cursed in a low voice, "I will deal with you later, you unfilial son." As she said this, she took a deep breath and looked at Su Qingjun again. At this moment, the look in her eyes was a little different. She had already faintly felt that this daughter in front of her, the most outstanding genius in the family, seemed to be somewhat different from before. If Mo did something wrong, he will naturally be punished according to the family rules. Even when your father returns home and finds out about this, he will not be spared. Madame Bai looked at Su Qingjun and said gloomily, "But what I want to know is, have you forgotten what I said to you in the front hall?" She seemed to be very, very angry. She stared at Su Qingjun and said word by word, "You don't care about your mother's life at all?" Su Qingjun smiled faintly. There seemed to be some bitterness and helplessness in her eyes. She shook her head gently and said, "Mother, you know it's not like that." Madame Bai said angrily, "Then why don't you listen to me and come here to make a scene?" Su Qingjun supported Lu Chen and began to walk forward slowly. At the same time she said, "Mother, actually you and I both know that those were just words of anger. You will not die." Madame Bai was so angry that her hand trembled. She pointed at Su Qingjun and said angrily, You disobedient and unfilial daughter." Su Qingjun's expression was a little desolate and lonely. She said, "Have you really touched your own conscience when you speak? For so many years, in the Su family, who is the most filial to you and father besides me? Could it be me, this ruthless and incompetent brother?" She supported Lu Chen and slowly walked to Madame Bai. She lowered her voice and said to her softly, "Besides, how can you bear to die? You care so much about your appearance every day. You take care of it for a few hours every day. What you put on and what you eat are all good things to maintain your appearance. And there are so many young mothers and concubines at home. If they don't die, how can you be willing to take a step first, right?" Madame Bai's face instantly turned pale. She looked at Su Qingjun. Her lips trembled slightly, but for a moment, she couldn't say anything. Su Qingjun walked past Madame Bai and continued to walk forward. After a moment, Madame Bai suddenly cried and shouted to her, all right. You've grown up. I can't control you anymore. When your father comes back, I will tell him about your disobedient appearance today. Let's see if he will be sad. Let's see if he will care about you." Su Qingjuan's footsteps paused for a moment. Then she turned around and looked at her with a strange expression. For a moment, Madame Bai felt uncomfortable under her gaze. She couldn't help but take a step back. Su Qingjun smiled faintly and said, "Mother, don't lie to yourself anymore. Father is much more practical than you. He must know that in the next 10 or even 100 years, who will the Su family really rely on? Will it be me, a 22-year-old Jean Dan friar, or a group of useless brothers? You see, actually, I really understand everything. I can see everything," Su Qingjun said to her quietly. "It's just that I didn't say anything before." The small courtyard was silent. Everyone was intimidated by Su Qingjuan's aura. No one dared to step forward to stop her. They just watched as Su Qingjun slowly half-carried and half-supported Lu Qin out of the small courtyard. When they were about to walk out of the door, Lu Qin, who had been leaning on Su Qingjun, suddenly smiled and said in a low voice, "Well said. Oh, it's all right. Very powerful. Very imposing. Isn't this all thanks to you?" Su Qingjun said softly. "Well, it's all because you taught me to flip tables." "Is that so? Then I'm also very powerful." "Is it powerful to be almost beaten to death?" "You really don't know how to chat," Lu Qin said helplessly. That day, many people in Kunwa City saw the light that once again soared into the sky. They saw the ending of Su Qingjun rushing to save Lu Qin. Among them, the people who saw it the most clearly were the onlookers from the beginning to the end of the Su residence. He Gang and Old Ma were the people who stood outside the Su residence from the beginning to the end. But their reactions were completely different. He Gang looked at the light that went far away in the sky. His eyes were full of hatred, as if they were about to spit fire. He gritted his teeth and cursed so loudly that no one could hear him. Then he turned around and left with large strides. "I must inform Big Brother about this matter as soon as possible. That bitch was moved by an ant-like odd-job disciple. She must be a fickle person. She's absolutely not worthy of Big Brother. I must warn Big Brother. Moreover, they are both famous geniuses. If there is a fight in the future, it's not like I can't make use of that ant named Lu Qin." Behind He Gang, the slightly plump old Ma looked like he finally heaved a sigh of relief. His whole body relaxed. But a moment later, when he looked at the Su residence's door again, his gaze changed. It was ice cold with a trace of callousness. Like a wolf or a tiger. In order to hide these traces, she would often turn into a calm, cold, beautiful, and aloof appearance. This effect is tried and true. Those who admire her are distanced from her by her actions. They cannot really get close to her. It is as if their eyes can only look at her figure from afar. So what they see in their eyes is a blurry shadow. So they cannot see the truth. So none of them can see the true appearance of that person. So everyone begins to imagine her to be exceptionally beautiful, turning her into the legendary omnipotent and peerless fairy. Just like countless similar things in the world. This has nothing to do with cultivation, it is just human nature. But what is fake is not real. What is impossible will never be true. Like a thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water, it will be pierced by reality. That day, Su Qingjun feels like she is that thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water. When she intimidates the Su family and chases away everyone, including her mother Madame Bai, she brings Lu Qin back to Fiantai in Kunlun Mountain. The momentum of that moment, the awe-inspiring presence, the resolute words, and the sharp words all make her look so perfect. Even the seriously injured Lu Qin admires her. After she returns to the mountain, she helps Lu Qin back to the hut and puts him down on the bed. Looking at this man who is covered in blood, Su Qingjun panics. Because she does not know how to treat injuries. This was a method that many cultivators, even low-level cultivators with low cultivation and even rogue cultivators were very familiar with, but she didn't know how to do it. Su Qingjun hurriedly brings out a lot of bottles and jars from the cave, which are filled with all kinds of precious herbs and elixirs. Then she looks at Lu Chen, who has countless wounds all over his body, and is dumbfounded. As a proud daughter of heaven from a noble family, when has she ever needed to personally deal with this kind of thing? But seeing the urgency of the matter, Su Qingjun does not care too much, and can only do whatever she wants. Therefore, those precious medicinal powders and elixirs are casually smeared on Lu Chen's wounds. She does not know if they have any effect, but the bleeding does stop very quickly. Su Qingjun is immediately happy, and then she grabs a few bottles of famous Kunlun elixirs and stuffs them into Lu Chen's mouth. Cough, cough, cough. Lu Chen, who was pretending to be asleep, coughs violently. He quickly reaches out to block Su Qingjun's medicine bottle, and then weakly says, "Don't worry, I won't die for a while. Let's not talk about whether you can cure me like this. I always feel that I might choke to death." Su Qingjun glares at him and says, "I am kind enough to give you elixirs, but you talk too much. Are you going to eat it or not?" Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and says, "I have to, but can I eat it later? Besides, I can't eat so many elixirs at once, or else the medicinal effects will backfire, and it will be no different from poison." Su Qingjun snorts, seems to know that she is a little too hasty, and puts the jade bottles on the table beside her, and says, "You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. I'll leave those things here, you can eat them yourself later. Anyway, you are a mysterious person, and I don't know where you come from. You know a lot of things, and you should know these things, right?" Lu Chen shook his head with some difficulty and says, "There's no such thing." Su Qingjun sighs, and presses down on his hand, and says, "All right, I was just saying casually, you should rest quickly." After saying that, she pauses for a moment, and her voice becomes a little deeper. She also lowers her head and says, "This time, you have really suffered a lot. I really didn't expect that my younger brothers at home would be so deranged." A faint glimmer of light flashes in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, and then he says, "This has nothing to do with you, don't think too much." Su Qingjun still wants to say something, but at this moment, suddenly, a voice comes from outside the thatched hut, and someone suddenly shouted, "Little June, come out." Su Qingjun is startled, and she stands up, and looks a little surprised, and says, "My master is here, and he ran over at this time, what is he doing?" Lu Chen lies on the bed and smiles and says, "Probably to help someone plead for leniency?" Su Qingjun thinks for a moment, and says, "It's not very likely, my master loves me very much, but he is not very kind to the Su family. In the past, he always told me that those younger brothers and sisters at home are too troublesome, and that I should not be with them." Halfway through her words, Su Qingjun suddenly stops, and Lu Chen says with a smile, "Was he right?" Su Qingjun sighs with a bitter smile, and then she says in a low voice, "You lie here and rest for a while, I'll be back soon." Walking out of the door of the thatched hut, Su Qingjun sees Masato Kihara standing on the Flying Goose Terrace, about 15 feet away from the thatched hut. After seeing her walk out, Masato Kihara also nods in acknowledgement. Su Qingjun quickly walks up to him and says, "Master, why are you here?" Masato Kihara laughs mischievously and says, "I heard you were in the limelight in Kunwa City, and when you returned to the Su family, you made a big fuss, and the whole Kunlun mountain is in an uproar, so I hurried over to take a look." Su Qingjun blushes, and she shakes her head and says, "It's not as exaggerated as you say." Masato Kihara chuckles, but he doesn't tease this female disciple anymore. Instead, he glances at the thatched hut and says, "I heard the person you saved is the part-time disciple Lu Chen who helped you plant the eagle fruit tree?" Su Qingjun nods and says, "Yes." Masato Kihara looks at her with a smile that doesn't seem like a smile, and says, "In the past, I, your master, have advised you many times to draw a clear line with the people in your family, because it's beneficial to your cultivation, but you never listened. But today, for the sake of an ordinary part-time disciple, you suddenly have a falling out with the Su family. Is there any personal feelings involved?" By the end of his words, Masato Kihara's eyes have already faintly revealed a sharp light, and he just indifferently looks at Su Qingjun. But Su Qingjun seems to be unaware of anything, and she just says with a bitter smile, "Master, when I first became your disciple, I told you that I'm only interested in cultivation, and I'm too lazy to think about other things. Then why did you save him?" Su Qingjuan's face darkens and says, "It's my Su family's brothers who have really gone too far. Even if this person isn't Lu Qin, but just a roadside beggar who has nothing to do with me, I think I probably won't sit idly by." Masato Kihara stares at Su Qingjun for a moment, and suddenly nods and says, "For you to think like this, it's somewhat beyond my expectations. But don't forget, you can save him for a while, but how can you save him for a lifetime? That Lu Chen's cultivation is low. In the future when he's cultivating on the Kunlun mountain, I'm afraid he'll most likely be attacked by the Su family both openly and covertly." Su Qingjuan's expression suddenly turns cold. But Masato Kihara doesn't seem to have the intention to let her off, and only says with a smile, "When that time comes, he's just an ordinary part-time disciple, and he can't really follow you for a lifetime. He and you are people from two completely different worlds, and he has to do all kinds of dirty and tiring work, while you're destined to be a person above others from birth. When that time comes, what will he do?" Su Qingjun grits her teeth and says, "I've also thought about this. He's not someone who has nothing to do with me." Masato Kihara's eyebrows twitches and says, "Oh, then I'm curious, he's not related to you in any way, and he's just an ordinary part-time disciple. What relationship does he have with you?" Su Qingjun takes a deep breath and then says in a loud voice, "Lu Qin is a disciple that I've just accepted." What? Masato Kihara is instantly stunned. "Congratulations, Master, you've now risen a generation and become a Grandmaster. That you're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.